Those are students barricading themselves into a building at Columbia University and expanding the area they're occupying on campus, while the university is promising to start suspending or expelling students. Just one of the many university protests happening around the country right now. I'm Gadi Schwartz, and this is Stay Tuned Now. At Columbia University tonight, a heavy police presence is building outside the gates. While on campus, a building has been taken over. Pro-Palestinian protesters storming Columbia's Hamilton Hall and setting up a barricade to keep others out. Now, the protesters breaking windows and forcing their way inside just after midnight, and then creating some barriers out of stacked up vending machines, some tables, chairs. Take a look.
Ready? Circle blockade around these three. We're going to move them out. Let's go.
Another human chain.
You're shoving me. All right.
So you know, you don't want to stop shoving you. This will ruin your whole life.
Oh, sorry.
Ruin your whole life.
And it wasn't all the protesters that were okay with this takeover, as you see. Some students outside tried to stop protesters from going in, as well as university staff inside the building, like a maintenance worker who got caught up in all that chaos there. Once inside, protesters hung up signs that said things like Intifada, which means uprising, and Hinds Hall, in reference to a 6-year-old that was killed in Gaza. Columbia is now asking students to avoid the main campus entirely and has even restricted media access. Our team is standing by with updates from coast to coast. And let's start with NBC News correspondent Stephen Romo in New York. Stephen, where do things stand right now with Hamilton Hall?
Yeah, Gadi, things remain tense right now. We're actually hearing of a large buildup of police presence of the NYPD right on the other side of campus, on the Broadway side of campus right now. Meanwhile, directly behind us is Hamilton Hall itself, where there's some 60 students that are still barricaded inside. As you mentioned, part of their ongoing demands for the university to divest from companies that they say are benefiting from the war going on right now in Gaza. Now, we heard from the NYPD this evening that they were just waiting to move into campus they were waiting for Columbia administrators to ask for their help. They say they're ready to supply that help. In addition to the occupiers inside that building right now, some 60 of them, we also have the encampment inside, the students that are still intense, as well as the massive show of protesters outside of the gates showing their support for both groups right now that are still on Columbia's campus.
And Stephen, this seems like an escalation on top of an already tense situation there. You said both groups. Is this, the one in Hamilton Hall, the same group as the organizers of the encampment? And how long are they planning on staying?
Yeah, a great question, Gadi. So the original groups that were organizing that protest, like Students for Justice in Palestine, they say they are not directly connected, directly part of the planning for occupying the Hamilton Hall right now, specifically organizing that. They say they weren't a part of that. But they say that the people who are in Hamilton Hall are planning to try to stay there until the university meets their demands, which the university has said in those talks that we mentioned days back that they were not planning to do. So the students are barricaded in there, and of course they need supplies. We saw milk crates being hoisted up to try to give them some food and other supplies earlier today, but we'll see just how long that will last, or if police do in fact move in and try to clear them out.
So you've got NYPD standing by, waiting for the call, basically from the university, right? How is the university reacting to all this?
Yeah, Gadi, another interesting question. The university says that the students who are in that building, they face being expelled altogether. But the students who are just in the encampment that have not gone into these buildings, they say they are facing suspension right now. And in the backdrop of all of this, we have students who are trying to complete their classes, trying to complete their school year. We actually saw many of them leave with suitcases and boxes moving out. The classes are over. They still have finals, but there are online options for them now. Here's more of what they had to say to us.
The police were called. I called the police personally, and there was no response. Nothing. total radio silence from the university, from law enforcement, as these group of rioters were allowed to commandeer Hamilton Hall. It was shocking. I mean, people that aren't living on campus no longer have access to it. I mean, I got several calls from my parents this morning asking for me to come home. I think I might be obliging them. It's unbelievable.
You can obviously tell there are people with a lot of opinions about what's happening here, but some students that were just trying to go to class and weren't so much a part of this. And many of them, by the way, they graduated during COVID, didn't have actual graduation. So one thing they're sort of upset about is that graduation outlook for this doesn't look good either for their college experience. Gadi?
And Stephen, taking over Hamilton Hall on Columbia's campus to protest a war, there's a long history of that, right?
Yeah, fascinating stuff here that I was reading about actually on Columbia's website. They have at least embraced it enough to have a complete section of their library's website that talks about the 1968 occupation of Hamilton Hall. In that case, protesting the Vietnam War, also the expansion of campus into other parts of the community. More than 100 students involved back then. Another interesting thing that's going on in the backdrop here is the history that we know has already taken place here, as right now, even more history is unfolding before us, Gadi.
Unfolding before us and in some ways repeating itself. Stephen Romo, thanks so much. And what is happening at Columbia is just one of almost 50 encampments at colleges and universities across the country right now. Like Columbia, some are getting extremely tense today. The University of South Florida, some protesters there were tear gassed after not leaving despite warnings to do so. But in other places, things actually seem like they may be calming down just a little bit. NBC News correspondent David Noriega joins us now from UCLA here in Los Angeles. David, I know we've heard police here in LA say the words de-escalation again and again. Is that just talk? What's it like out there right now?
Gadi, I will get back to what's happening at UCLA in a moment. I do want to say other colleges around the country are, in fact, de-escalating. Brown University today, for example, offered the first example of a successful agreement between protesters in an encampment and a university administration. They dismantled the encampment after receiving a concession from the university saying that the university would discuss and eventually vote on divesting from corporations associated with Israel's war in Gaza. Here at UCLA, things have been calm but tense, but I have to say they seem to be potentially beginning to escalate now. Just about 30 minutes ago, the Daily Bruin, the local student media outlet here on campus, reported that the university has informed the encampment that it is declaring their assembly unlawful and threatening disciplinary action against students. They still have not threatened to bring in law enforcement, so it's unclear exactly what that will mean moving forward. But I will say it's possible that the tensions here on this campus are actually ratcheting up. Gadi?
I mean, yeah, ratcheting up, and then looking behind you, it looks like there's plywood phalanx almost around the encampment, and then there's people on both sides of that. What is the lay of the land where you are right now?
Yeah, so one of the things that's been happening here on UCLA is that, so when the encampment started, it was accessible on all sides. Then there were a series of confrontations between the protesters at the encampment and counter-protesters over the weekend, which led protesters in the encampment to set up this perimeter, this sort of barricade perimeter that you see behind me, made out of plywood and other sort of improvised materials. But the university also set up these steel barricades, and the university itself blocked off access to a number of walkways that eventually that lead to the single entrance to the encampment. Now, the students who are manning the encampment, who are inside the encampment, are very tightly controlling who gets into the encampment. They have there's a single entry point. They are keeping track of who gets in. They don't allow people in unless there's someone inside who will vouch for them. They have a system of wristbands. It's honestly very well organized in the same way that they're very tightly controlling what social movements call message discipline. They're only allowing certain people to talk to the media, and I've spoken to several of them. They have they're really sticking to the sort of pre-agreed narrative that they have clearly crafted for this situation. Now, there's been some discussion, some controversy, I should say, around the fact that the university is closing off some walkways. None of the buildings have been blocked off. People can still get into all these buildings through different entries. But some members of the community here, students, faculty, parents, say that the university is essentially facilitating this encampment. There was actually a group of of moms of UCLA students who arrived here just a couple of hours ago, very visibly angry, were sort of confronting university staff, asking about why they had set up these barricades. And there's been generally talk of specifically Jewish students not being able to get to their classrooms. Now, that last part is not exactly true because the university is blocking off access to all students. When I asked one of the spokespeople for the encampment whether this was true, they pointed out to me that there are many Jewish students inside the encampment, and the Jewish organizations and students were a core part of organizing the encampment in the first place. Nevertheless, like I said, some other Jewish members of the UCLA community are very upset about it. We asked, for example, one of these moms who arrived of UCLA students, Jewish students, what she thought about the fact that there are Jewish students inside the encampment protesting in solidarity with the pro-Palestine, contingent. This is what she said.
You know what? There's a Jew and a Jew. Okay.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, I can explain. Somebody who's been tainted, they're brainwashed. Their frontal lobes aren't developed.
Gadi, I've been saying that these protests on campus reveal that there is a struggle happening over the definition of anti-Semitism and who gets to define it. I think it's actually something deeper. There's a struggle underway about what it means today to be Jewish in America. Gadi?
Perfectly said. David Noriega, thanks so much. And one of the demands of the student protesters is a lasting ceasefire, which is something the U.S., along with Egypt and Qatar, have been trying to broker now for months. But it appears a deal has now been put forward. Today, Secretary Antony Blinken saying the ball is in Hamas's court.
Israelis have put a strong proposal on the table. They've demonstrated that they're willing to compromise. And now it's on Hamas. And no more delays, no more excuses. The time to act is now.
So that is the United States' position, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he is still promising a ground invasion into Rafah, quote, with or without a ceasefire deal. NBC's Raf Sanchez has more.
Secretary Blinken today crisscrossing the Middle East, trying to secure an agreement that would pause the fighting in Gaza and bring the hostages home. His day started in Saudi Arabia. From there, he went to Jordan and on here to Israel. Now, this is a delicate diplomatic task, and it was made more complicated today by Israeli threats to move ahead with an offensive on the city of Rafah with or without a hostage deal. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying Israel has no choice but to go into that city because Hamas's remaining battalions are hiding there. Secretary Blinken, speaking in Jordan earlier, says the United States opposes any Israeli attack without a credible plan to get those million-plus Palestinian civilians out of harm's way. But he did also say that Israel has shown flexibility in these negotiations to try to get a deal, and that right now the ball is in Hamas's court, that there could be an immediate ceasefire if Hamas would agree to the offer on the table. That offer calls for Hamas to release 33 hostages, that is women, children, the elderly, people with severe medical conditions. In return, Israel would agree to a ceasefire of around 40 days and the release of thousands of Palestinian prisoners, potentially. Now, Hamas says its leaders are studying that proposal. Their mediators were in Cairo yesterday. It can sometimes take a few days for Hamas as an organization to respond because it needs to get messages to its ultimate leader, Yahya Sinwar, who is in Gaza, believed to be in the tunnels underneath of Rafah right now. It can take a couple of days to get messages to him, to get messages back. But there are many, many families, both in Israel and in Gaza, who are hoping that diplomacy will work and that this ceasefire agreement will come into effect. Back to you.
Raf Sanchez, thanks. In New York, a busy day in the hush money trial of Donald Trump with a new key witness taking the stand, but not before the former president got slapped with a contempt of court, the judge declaring that Trump had violated his gag order not just one time, but 9 times. And the penalty, like $9,000 and a warning. Keep it up and you risk going to jail. So regardless of how big or small that fine was, afterwards it did look like Trump was taking that warning seriously. He deleted all the Truth Social posts the judge ordered removed. Then Trump couldn't help himself. Take a listen.
This gag order is not only unique, it's totally unconstitutional. I'm the Republican candidate for president of the United States. But you have a judge who's totally conflicted, totally, absolutely conflicted, that he's rushing this case through.
All right. So even the judge seemed to acknowledge the $9,000 probably won't be much of a threat to silence Trump when he can, quote, easily afford such a fine. NBC News legal analyst Angela Sinandela joins us now. Angie, hello. Good to see you. $9,000 seems kind of like chump change here. But jail, is that a real possibility the next time?
Yes, so $9,000 obviously will not be any form of real deterrent for Trump. But I think what's maybe more relevant is that he found 9 violations and also 9 out of 10 that were requested by the prosecution. So what this means is that if he decides next time to actually throw Trump in jail, there is a record. It's not like he just did it out of the blue. Not only is he giving notice, but he also almost let 9 times slide before. So there's another hearing Thursday for more alleged violations of this gag order. And we'll see what he will do. Now, also what I think is relevant, though, of this 9 out of 10 is that in not finding that 10th alleged violation to be a real violation, he's really almost adding validity to his argument. And I think that's why Trump is saying that it's conflicted. But I actually think the opposite, which is on appeal, it will show that he was thoughtful and he was really attempting to protect Trump's rights and any presidential candidate's right. So the reason why he allowed for that 10th is that allowing Trump to respond defensively if any witness does attack him. So almost he's narrowing the gag order in that way, which will strengthen his future case for upholding it and for maybe actually throwing Trump in jail.
It sounds like you're saying, you fool me once, shame on you. You fool me 10 times, okay, you might go to jail. It's going to be wild to watch.
10, 20, we'll see, Gadi.
Yeah, exactly. Today in court, though, I know the lawyer for Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, he was on the docket. What did we learn there?
Yeah, so the prosecution is still really trying to build this house, build their context, because, frankly, it's chaotic. They have so much to prove, not just proving that there was this catch-and-kill scheme, which is what we saw David Pecker of the National Enquirer really lay out this week, but also the next level, that on top of this catch-and-kill, it was meant to influence the election. So this lawyer talked about how Karen McDougal received $150,000 from the National Enquirer, but because the National Enquirer didn't want to pay that much to squash Stormy Daniels' claims, that's where Michael Cohen had to get in the door. But what was really relevant is that Keith Davidson also said that it was Trump who was behind all of this. It wasn't just Cohen kind of going rogue. So with all of the steps of this fraud that the prosecution is trying to prove, they really have to show that Trump was behind it all, and also that his intent was to defraud and to really change the way of the election. So almost talking about both Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels together lays it more out as a conspiracy, a pattern that he was doing this to bolster his candidacy. But I will say, we haven't really gotten there yet. We haven't gotten to the finality of, did they really influence the election? Was that statute violated? We're still building the house of the business fraud, of the base. So this is complicated, and there's so much that lies ahead, Gadi.
Yeah, and for that, we will stay tuned. Angela Sinandela, thanks so much for joining us. And don't go anywhere. We are just getting started. Up next, time is ticking down in Florida as the state's abortion ban is about to go into effect. Marissa Parra is going to join us on the other side of the break with a little bit more on that. Plus, remember how Yogi Bear would steal picnic baskets in Jellystone National Park and then everyone would have a nice little laugh about it? That's not going on here. Bears are literally invading a California town by the hundreds. We're going to get into that very hairy situation a little later this hour. And in tonight's Future of Everything, we are talking about the future of Mark Zuckerberg, or Zuck, as he's now known. Gone are the flip-flops and the hoodies, and in their place is a lean, mean social media titan. But is Wall Street ready to embrace this new Zuck? That's coming up, so stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. The latest on that deadly shooting in Charlotte, North Carolina in just a minute. But first, here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Remember that former NSA employee who sold classified information to an undercover FBI agent posing as a Russian official? Well, today he was sentenced to nearly 22 years in prison, with a judge calling it a mercy sentence. And the employee said he would be selling all the secrets he had for $85,000, which included sensitive U.S. defense capabilities and a threat assessment of a separate unnamed country. Meanwhile, the FCC is going after the biggest U.S. phone carriers, fining them a combined $200 million for allegedly illegally sharing customers' location data without their consent. T-Mobile was hit with the biggest bill with a fine of $80 million. Both AT&T and Verizon are saying they will plan to appeal that order. And Walmart is closing all of its healthcare clinics across the country and getting rid of its telehealth provider. They said rising costs and a challenging reimbursement environment are to blame. And a huge move for the Biden administration. They're now looking at reclassifying weed as a less dangerous drug. That means instead of being in the same category as drugs like heroin, it'll be in one of the drug categories with ketamine and certain types of Tylenol. Now, this isn't a done deal yet. It still has to be reviewed by the White House's budget office. And the nominations are out for this year's Tony Awards. The shows Hell's Kitchen and Stereophonic are bringing in the most nominations with 13 each. The awards will be held in June in New York. And in North Carolina, new details in the deadly shooting that killed 4 police officers, which is now the country's deadliest confrontation for law enforcement in almost a decade. Those officers were trying to serve a warrant at a home in a Charlotte neighborhood when a suspect opened fire. Police say the officers were trying to arrest that person for having a gun illegally. NBC's Sam Brock has more from Charlotte.
The attempts by a fugitive task force to reclaim an automatic firearm from a convicted felon here led to one of the deadliest days that law enforcement has seen in years. And all of it played out, Gadi, right where I'm standing. The house behind me in tatters. You'll see riddled bullets on the sides of it, glass that is smashed, a giant hole in the middle of the property. And investigators are trying to figure out what exactly happened. Let's go through and get you caught up on what we know. Over the course of the last 24 hours, investigators have uncovered an AR-15, a handgun, and more than 100 shell casings. They also believe that the suspect at the center of this, Terry Hughes, was likely firing his weapon from several locations all over the top and bottom floor, both sides of the house, and that could have created the illusion that there were multiple shooters. Right now, that they don't believe that the 2 women who were inside the home were also, one of them, firing a weapon, but that is still under investigation. As far as how this community is dealing with the just depth of loss right now, Gadi, you're talking about 4 law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. That is the deadliest day that the community has seen, law enforcement at large, in about a decade, since 2016 in Dallas. Those 4 men were all fathers, they were all husbands, they were all valued members here, and you just have to listen to the strain of the voice of the police chief when he talked about how he had to inform folks, and he's seen officers killed in the line of duty before, but this time was different. Listen to Chief Jennings earlier today.
The last few days have it's just been very tough, and knowing that you have families that are hurting right now. We'll get through it, though.
The emotion is still raw. Obviously, the details still need to be ironed out. But Chief Jennings did tell me this. He believes that Terry Hughes was lying in wait with the goal of killing as many police officers as possible. In Charlotte, Sam Brock, NBC News. Scotty, back to you.
In just a few short hours, abortion access in Florida is going to look drastically different as a 6-week ban is set to take effect tomorrow. Now, this will replace a 15-week ban, effectively forcing people across the South to travel as far as Virginia for an abortion. Up until now, Florida had one of the least restrictive abortion laws in the South since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and actually drew in patients from other states, but that is all about to change. And as a result, clinics across the state say that they have been overwhelmed by patients trying to get an abortion before the new ban takes effect. NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra joins us now from an abortion clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. Marissa, you spoke with an owner of a women's medical center there. How are they navigating all these changes?
Hey, Gadi. Well, I've spoken to the abortion care clinic employees behind me. I've also spoken to abortion care clinics around the state. And what I can tell you, every single one of them said is that since April 1st, when the state Supreme Court released their decision that this law would be changing tomorrow, abortion care clinics around the state have been working in overdrive. Every single one of them telling that they are either doubling or tripling the number of appointments, especially in this last week leading up to tomorrow. But what I found very telling is the number of people who've been calling the clinics and had no idea that the ban is changing come tomorrow. Take a listen.
But we've warned everybody who's called that it's changing, and nobody knew. A lot of girls don't know that this is happening.
You were getting phone calls from people that had no idea.
No idea. No idea.
What did they say when you told them?
Are you kidding me? That's what they're saying. Are you kidding me? And patients who are already, 10 or 12 weeks, and we couldn't get them in on Saturday for their first part to come back today, they have to go out of state.
I want to point out two things, Gadi. The first thing I want to point out is the number of people who genuinely had no idea that they were even 6 weeks along until their ultrasound appointment. They went in thinking that they were 4 weeks. They found out only after their consultation that they were actually beyond the 6 week mark. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is that people outside of Florida may not realize that with the current law as it is today, it requires a 2-visit minimum. So you have the consultation on one day, a 24-hour waiting period, and then you're able to either get the medication or the procedure. So even though the ban, the 6-week ban, goes into effect tomorrow, today really began the process of turning patients away, because if you are 6 weeks or over, you cannot get the medication or procedure tomorrow. Gadi?
Man, such an important point. And Marissa, Florida, it seems like they saw a spike in abortions last year, partly because of women that were coming from states where abortions were even more restricted. So what happens now?
That's a great question. And one of the reasons why we chose to be here in Jacksonville is this is a city that's very close to the border. And this is a clinic that has seen many people come from surrounding states. And when you look at the map, you can see just how restrictive other states are. They either have a total ban or a near total ban. And so clinics like this one say that they see 1 in 3 people is from out of state. They said that even within the last 2 days, they've seen people from Mississippi, from Louisiana, who were beyond 6 weeks, who couldn't get it in their own state, came here before that deadline tomorrow. And so, Gadi, I will mention that that is something that clinics, as well as funds and networks that are working to work with people who are seeking abortion care, they realize now a lot more of their budget is going to have to go towards funding transportation. This is going to add days, and it's going to be a lot more expensive than it was previously here in the state of Florida.
Yeah, pretty striking map there. Now, abortion is going to be on the ballot in Florida come November, right? Could all of this be overturned then?
That's a great point. And in theory, Gadi, we could see a world where today there's a 15-week abortion ban. Tomorrow, that turns into a 6-week abortion ban that voters, in theory, could overturn in November. But that's only if enough voters show up and decide to vote as such. It's a high threshold. It's more than a simple majority. It's 60% or more. But I will point out that both sides of the aisle, both those who are anti-abortion, we have conservative legislators that are very confident that people will be voting no on Amendment 4. They're confident that the rightward trend of Florida will continue and work in their favor. And then, of course, Democrats hoping to mobilize voters. We talked about that rightward trend in Florida. They're hoping that this will be a part of their efforts to make and keep Florida a purple state. And so we have seen an increase in Democrats showing up here in Florida, including the president himself. President Biden was here last week to talk solely about abortion, and Vice President Harris will be here tomorrow in Jacksonville to do exactly the same. So, Gadi, we have seen already those efforts beginning ahead of November. But like I said, it's more than just a simple majority. This will require 60% or more people to vote in favor of Amendment 4 in order to see the 6-week ban that starts tomorrow get turned over to protect until roughly 24 weeks. Gadi?
Amendment 4 is the one to watch. Marissa Parra, thanks so much. And right now, it is another very active night of tornado threats across the Midwest. People there barely getting a chance to recover from back-to-back storms. Now, this tornado right here was spotted earlier today in Kansas. The National Weather Service confirmed another twister in Oklahoma. 8 million people are at risk tonight of tornadoes and damaging hail. And this comes after deadly storms over the weekend killed 5 people and destroyed entire neighborhoods. This next round adding to a very stormy April, the second most active on record. More than 100 tornadoes have been confirmed in this recent outbreak alone. NBC News' meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now. Bill, who's seeing the worst of the storms here tonight?
Gadi, it's the same areas that got hit this past weekend. We're in mostly areas of Iowa, Missouri now, through Oklahoma, and especially in Kansas. So this is all our storm reports. It's been about 91. The white is large hail, and we've had some big hail. We've had baseball-sized hail reported today, but it's the tornadoes that have caused the damage. The picture that you showed in Westmoreland, Kansas, I've seen confirmation that has destroyed a couple homes and a business that did do some significant damage. They're doing search and rescue. That's the one right there in the town. I've not heard of any reports of any fatalities or injuries. But again, homes have been destroyed and lives have been changed because of that tornado right there. It doesn't look that bad, but it was very intense right at the base of it when it went through the town of Westmoreland, a little small town just north of Interstate 70 near Manhattan, Kansas. So let's take you through the areas of concern. In the last hour or two, we've been watching a very strong supercell thunderstorm producing tornadoes just north of Interstate 70. This is Lawrence, Kansas. That's where the University of Kansas is located. Obviously, this is the capital of Kansas here, Topeka, Kansas. And the red icons show you where tornadoes were reported. So through North Topeka, we had a report of a tornado in the last hour and another one just right after that. Currently, the tornado warning has been dropped. It looks like the spin has gone away. Still some very large hail with that circulation as it continues along Interstate 70. So it's exiting Lawrence right now, probably 1 to 2 inch hail with that. And it's heading towards Bonner Springs. And eventually, this will be heading towards Kansas City. We're hoping it weakens before it gets there, obviously. Tornado watches do go up till 10 p.m. Central Time here for areas from Des Moines into Iowa. And the areas of Kansas, this tornado watch should be dropped in the next hour or two as these storms move out of the region. Kansas City, it looks like you have probably another half hour before those storms get to you. So for the rest of this evening, the storms will begin to slowly weaken as they head through the slight risk area. If we do get additional tornadoes, they would be very isolated, southern Iowa and also mostly in northern Missouri. Gadi, tomorrow we do it again. This time we're going to be focused in areas of Kansas again, Oklahoma, and areas of West Texas. Looks like isolated tornadoes, but maybe a strong tornado or two.
We're seeing some very powerful tornadoes this year in some states that haven't seen one in nearly a decade. I know it's tornado season, but is there a reason that they are particularly strong this season?
Well, coming out of the El Nino into the La Nina could have a little bit of favorability to do with it. Also, you know, sometimes you just get in these weather patterns and they get stuck, and that's what we've been dealing with this April. So here's a map that shows you, the calendar for the month of April. Each of these red symbols shows you days that we've had to track tornadoes, and you'll notice we had significant tornadoes, obviously this past weekend, but even through the middle and the beginning of the month, we haven't had many days without tornadoes. We're up to 280 total, not including today, so that'll probably put us up to 285 or so, but we're not even close to the record. This will be in the top 5 for April. But Gadi, in 2011, we had 780 tornadoes in one April. So this has been bad, but it's been much worse.
Yeah, much, much worse. Bill Cairns, thanks so much. And we are monitoring some reports that things are heating up over at Columbia University in New York. We're going to be checking back with Antonia Hilton there in just a bit, so stick with us. And turning now to some breaking news out of New York. The NYPD presence is growing outside of Columbia University. NBC correspondent Antonia Hilton is there right now monitoring all of it. Antonia, we just saw some video come in of police. It looked like a very large contingent of police that were headed towards campus. We've been hearing that there have been officers amassing outside of Columbia's campus. What's happening right now? Have those police officers that you're seeing from this recorded tape made it onto the campus proper?
Gadi, we are hearing the exact same thing. We've also seen officers in riot gear, and there's a growing presence behind me here. I'm on Amsterdam and 116th. Right there, that's Hamilton Hall. But our understanding from where we've seen the NYPD mobilize is that there's a possibility they're going to enter campus from the opposite side, so the Broadway side, and then come across the lawn and come to the building here. I just spoke with the dean of the journalism school, Jelani Cobb. He confirmed that he has been told that the police entry is imminent. And we are hearing that students and faculty are receiving alerts on their phones telling them that they need to shelter in place, that being out and about right now is something that will put them at risk for disciplinary action. And so everyone on this campus is just waiting for that to begin. It really seems like there's no longer a question of whether or not the NYPD is going to enter. It's just when. Gadi.
Antonia, I mean, I've covered a fair share of these types of situations. Sometimes you can go in there with your camera as a member of the press. Sometimes you can't because the protesters won't let you in. And sometimes you can't because the police won't let you in. What's the situation tonight?
This time it will be because the NYPD and the administration of Columbia will not let us in. It has actually been extremely challenging to get access to campus today. The administration created a pool, so a pool camera was allowed in from just 2 to 4 p.m. That's a very small window for a campus that has had tension and activity pretty much hour by hour for weeks now. So it means that there is a lot that's happened on this campus today, and certainly a lot happening inside Hamilton Hall, where there's an estimate of about 60 people, a mix of students and, according to the NYPD, maybe outside agitators and anarchists inside. And the press has not been able to get access to see this. And we've received no indication that that's going to change the moment the NYPD enters. Certainly, some members of our team will get up close to that gate and ask. But we are not going to hold our breath, Gadi. It is looking like a very tight lockdown at the moment.
And Antonia, we had been hearing earlier in the day throughout the coverage that the NYPD would not be responding without a very explicit call from Columbia University. Does it look like that call has happened?
Absolutely. And in fact, faculty members and a dean, Jelani Cobb, essentially confirmed that that's the case. The NYPD has made very clear that they wouldn't just enter campus from calls from students or questions on social media, that they needed that invitation from the president, Manoush Shafiq. And that is exactly how this happened the first time around. She reached out to the NYPD. The school identified what they called a threat to safety, which was that initial encampment construction, and the NYPD came to clear it and arrest students. So that is the same process that we understand the university is following now. We were also told by faculty and staff that there was an attempt by many faculty members to restart negotiations, something that had been going on for a while. A group of students, staff, faculty, and administrators all trying to talk about other ways to de-escalate this and find a solution, some kind of discussion point or a vote the university could take that would get them out of essentially what we're going to see happen tonight. And many people, both pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli students and faculty members that we've been speaking to, they feel that the fact that it's gotten to this point where the NYPD is going to enter for a second time and potentially put students at risk as this all unfolds, that they are putting the blame for that squarely on the administration's feet. There's a lot of anger on all sides. Jewish students feeling like this administration hasn't done enough to keep them safe and that it's their fault that this escalated, and pro-Palestinian students feeling that the administration has not engaged with them in a dialogue and tried to find another way out of this debate.
And Antonia, we've been hearing throughout the day that there are two different groups with possibly similar aims, but you've got the ones that are in Hamilton Hall, and they may not be directly connected to the ones that are at the encampment or have organized the encampment. Is that the case, or do they look connected?
Yeah, that's a really important question because it can be hard to explain sometimes, especially with, a limited amount of time on air, what's happening here on the ground. There are a number of groups involved in these protests, and they have decentralized power structures. So that means there's not one student, one person calling the shots every day here. It means that there are different groups of students. They rotate, they kind of share, they discuss. Some of them are graduate students. Some of them are involved in unions, and they are staff and workers on campus. And then some of them are undergraduate activists. And so who is actually inside the hall right now is very much an open question. We know that there are some students, both our NBC News teams and an intern working for NBC News who's a student here has confirmed that there are students inside that building. But we also are hearing from the NYPD that there may be a large presence of people who are not affiliated with Columbia at all, essentially people who would have broken onto campus and taken part in what unfolded last night, entering that building, helping to barricade it, and kind of creating this chain that blocked other students from being able to access Hamilton Hall. And so that's what's going to be important here. And I think that's also some of the concern that we heard from the NYPD in their presser around 6 o'clock, which is that they don't fully know what they're going to encounter when those doors open or are forced open. Will it be students? Will it be anarchists, outside agitators, people from around the city who have no connection to Columbia at all? And will other people be in the fray? Will they get mixed into this? It's part of clearly why they've called for this shelter in place, because some of this is frankly, it is very fluid and unstable, Gadi.
And Antonia, I know it's difficult to tell from your vantage point, but I'm just thinking through the logistics here. Once police make their way in, not only are they going to be confronting the people that are there, but it's been days and days of an encampment buildup, of the barricades, which we saw those images of. Just looking behind you at the different levels of wall and defenses almost, what is NYPD facing there?
Well, you can see right behind me here, there are dozens and dozens of protesters right there on the street, right in front of the building. That is Hamilton Hall. Throughout the day, students have unfurled banners, opened the window. They've flown flags, clearly trying to interact with people on the street. So that is certainly one element, one group that the NYPD will have to contend with. They have multiple entry points and possibilities, though. So there is this entry point, this gate behind me here that the NYPD could enter, but there are also others on the other side. So if they were to try to, for example, enter a bit more surreptitiously without people who are inside the building seeing them arriving and exactly what moment they're going to get to Hamilton Hall, they would probably enter from Broadway, come across campus, and then try to access the building first from one of the doors on the other side. So what we will see at the moment the NYPD actually reaches Hamilton Hall, that's an open question right now. We have an NYPD presence here on the street, and that is beat cops. There are supervisors. There are captains. There have been drone operators here for hours flying right above Hamilton Hall. There are people in riot gear on the other side of the street. We have seen tons of cars, and so there is a very, very large mobilization, but they are not telling us exactly how this is going to go down yet.
Have you spoken to some of the students that are out there on the outside of campus watching what's going on?
Yes, we have. And there's a range of reactions. You know, we've spoken to students who are infuriated, who feel that this is frightening, that it is threatening. It was scary for them to hear the noises of windows get smashed. Students grab furniture and create the barricade last night. We even spoke to a mom who came to pick up her freshman child because for her, this was the last straw. She did not want her child here on campus anymore. Then we've spoken to some students who say that they are pro-Palestinian, that they have supported the protests, but at this point they're concerned that what's going to happen, and especially if it's true that there are outside non-affiliated people who are involved, what might that mean? How violent could this get, and what would that mean for the rest of their movement? And this is a community that has mostly been very peaceful. Their encampment, they have done lessons, they've worked with faculty, they have had programming and events. And so the students who are part of that are angry that it's escalated in some cases to this point. Then there are other students whose their anger is really focused on the administration and this feeling that the administration has failed. I just got a note from our producer, Andy Weir. Police in riot gear, Gadi, are reported right near the Broadway entrance. That's the entrance I was talking about that's on the other side that would allow them to enter and approach this building without being seen.
And we are working on getting some pictures from those locations on the other side of the building. To be clear, you were just talking about the administration. Can you tell us what Hamilton Hall is, what offices are in Hamilton Hall, and what has been taken over?
This is a historic administrative building. There are classes that happen there. There are faculty that have their offices in there. Faculty that were frustrated this morning when they got the news that their swipes were turned off and they weren't going to be able to get in and access their own laptops or belongings. And this is also a very symbolic place, a place that was at the center of protests back in the 60s, the 80s, and the 90s. And that's why there's so much resonance here for the people on the ground and the broader Columbia community, Gadi.
Antonia Hilton, we're going to be checking back with you in just a bit here. Thank you so much for your coverage. And NBC News law enforcement analyst Jim Cavanaugh is also standing by. He joins us now. Hey, Jim, tense night tonight. In situations like this, with such a huge police presence, we're seeing police with zip ties, obviously. What are they preparing for? What are they going to encounter when they go in? You see some of the barricades. It's difficult to know exactly what's going on inside of Hamilton Hall, but what's the first order of business here?
Well, Gadi, they want to go slow. You know, the NYPD has probably the best, civil disturbance unit in the country. The Metropolitan Washington Police as well, and certainly L.A. and Chicago, the big cities. But the NYPD has, a unit with 3,000 officers to handle major events and civil disturbances. So they're well prepared and well trained. And they want to go in slow and methodically. They don't want to ramp the thing up, but they want to make the arrests. I think what's going to happen, is we might have some of the students or actors in there who start throwing things at the police, and they've had time to prepare for that. But the officers will have their helmets and their body armor on, and of course, as you mentioned, the zip ties, they'll have everything ready, and they'll be prepared to do mass arrests. They'll have their buses outside, large buses where they can transport them to be booked. And, the numbers we were hearing, a couple of hundred maybe in there. I'm not sure if it's grown, but they should be able to handle that in a few hours.
And, Jim, I want to read you something that just came in from our desk. It's from NYPD's Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism. And they say that the concern is that an outside group at Columbia has been teaching types of tactics that will make it difficult for police to enter buildings. And if police do enter, it appears that the group is preparing for a fight. So in terms of tactics for getting into a building that has now been barricaded for almost an entire day, what are they going to face?
Yeah, they're going to face barricaded doors, furniture against the doors, bookcases stacked up against the doors, hallways blocked. The real danger to the officers in this situation and to students is fire. Fire is the existential danger in a situation like this. And, there's been people who have threatened to burn down the institution, and now they're in the building barricading the doors. I mean, just if some person decides they're going to start a fire, I mean, this can be a very, very, dangerous, tragic, fast-moving event. So it's not just, protesters and feelings. It can be very, very dangerous. The officers will be able to get through those barricades, and if they're pelted with, objects and rocks and bottles, then, I think they can count on the NYPD will use tear gas and, get them to leave. So, the officers have many tools at their disposal. And I think it's going to depend on the level of violence they encounter as they go in. If they're able to push through the barricades, Gadi, and not be assaulted, then they'll push through and make the arrests. But if they're assaulted heavily, then they're going to, drop back and probably fire tear gas in there.
And when it comes to tear gas, I mean, we've seen incidents in the past where tear gas has led to unintended fires. Is that a concern here tonight?
Well, there's cold gas and there's hot gas, and in a situation like this, they'd be using what we call cold gas, and that's not going to start a fire. I think if we have a fire, it's going to be by someone who lights the fire. It's not going to be by a tear gas object. The units, the special squads know the difference, and they would use cold gas in this situation. And they don't want to use gas. They really don't want to use gas. That's only if they're being attacked and they have to. They'd rather just push through the barricade and make the arrests, and they'll have a number of officers to do that. And I guarantee that NYPD Intelligence Division has already gathered a lot of information about where the students are in the building, what rooms they're occupying, what floors they're occupying. They already have that. They know that. And they're probably listening to a lot of the information. They might have even listening devices in there by now. So they have a lot of intelligence on where to go and what to do. It's just that emotions are high and they get ramped up during these things, and it can be very, very dangerous. So I hope they start with negotiations. Remember, people say, oh, you can't negotiate, you can't negotiate. You know, you always negotiate. Negotiation is not concession. It's not giving away anything. It's the dialogue that begins the event. And, you know, you start talking and you start saying, you know, this is what's going to happen. And this is what you've got to do. And the students will, you know, make demands. And the crisis negotiators for the NYPD, who are great. They got a great team there. The police crisis negotiators, it changes now from the university's negotiators who try to talk to the students about what should happen to police crisis negotiators, because now you're in the middle of a crisis. And Jim, that should be the ebb and flow. Mm-hmm.
That makes me think of what Antonia was just telling us a little while ago when it comes to the structure, if you will, of the protest. It's somewhat decentralized. She said that there are different groups and that there is not a single student leader. They all seem to operate somewhat autonomously. Does that make negotiations a little bit more difficult?
Well, it certainly does, but, you know, you're going to get to a section of the building where you're at the, you know, the barricade point, the point where a bunch of people are in a room, a giant room, a conference room or something, and they've barricaded the door. They may be talking to other fellow actors on cell phones and consulting with people, but really those people are in that room and they're going to have to deal with the police that are there. So that negotiation, you know, may be separate than any other broader negotiation. But I hope they use those negotiation tactics to try to get some peaceful surrenders here, because that's the goal. You know, the goal is a peaceful solution and ending to the crisis, not, you know, violence, people getting hurt, danger to everybody. The police do not want that. They would be more than happy if they called in there and everybody walked out of there waving their flags and chanting their slogans. I guarantee you that's what the officers would prefer. So I hope they go slow. They're a top unit. I hope they go slow. I hope they do use their crisis negotiation team and try to walk through it. But, you know, eventually you may have to use force if they won't accede to any negotiations. But the negotiations are to drop the level of emotion down a little bit and try to make reasoned decisions. You know, you can step out, make a statement to the press, you know, these kind of things. Whatever it is you want to do, as long as it's peaceful, try to get a solution.
Jim, we really appreciate your insight. We're going to turn now to NBC News national law and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, who joins us on the phone right now with some late-breaking information. Tom, I understand you're getting some information as we speak. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so I think you've been reporting, Columbia University has a shelter in place right now for the campus. There is movement in and around the various entrances, and I think a big concern right now, and it's at other universities and in colleges in New York, specifically the City College of New York, is they do not want anybody else getting on campus that shouldn't be on campus. That's how this kind of situation is escalated in the first place, and that's what they're trying to avoid right now. We spoke with NYPD's head of intelligence and counterterrorism, Deputy Commissioner Rebecca Weiner, earlier tonight, and Commissioner Weiner's focus is on these groups and these individuals who they've known for some time from prior protests and prior incidents, best described as anarchists, best described as individuals who don't have a particular ideology. So, in other words, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli, pro-whatever, it doesn't really matter to them. What matters to them is sowing chaos, co-opting a protest movement, trying to convince students, hey, you're not going to get this done, you're not going to have your word heard unless there's some sort of a confrontation, unless this really escalates. And they're the ones, according to the NYPD, who are setting up the barricades, locking doors, and using techniques and doing things that go far beyond students sitting in tents on a lawn, speaking out on a cause that they believe in. And so that's what's radically changed things here in the last 8 to 12 hours, and that's why I think you're seeing such a significant presence at Columbia University at this hour. And I think that press conference tonight, sure, the audience was all of us in the public, but I think the audience primarily was Columbia University. And the police department's very real concern. They tell us not only injuries to students, but also if they do have to enter campus, and they do have to enter this Hamilton Hall. Based on what these individuals have done in the past, the NYPD believes that they're there to fight police. And of course, there can be, injuries to police, injuries to those individuals, and injuries to bystanders. And I think that's what has escalated the concern. The police department was fully content, based on our reporting over the last week, to just, if the students were on the lawn, there's no permissible reason for them to enter private property. Columbia was clear about that, and the police department, as long as students weren't being injured, as long as there weren't assaults, they had no reason to go on campus, and they weren't pining for it either. But I think obviously the last, as I mentioned, 8 to 12 hours of law enforcement work, investigative work, they've come to the conclusion that there's a real problem that potentially exists here. I think to Kavanaugh's point, it's a very smart one. There's no reason why most of this shouldn't go without any sort of incident of violence, that there should be really no issues. The police department is simply just going to issue a summons, which anywhere else in the country is called a ticket for trespassing. So these individuals can expect to be taken into custody. They're likely not even going to be booked. They'll be issued a ticket, and then they'll have to deal with Columbia later. So that's kind of the overall scene, but we're obviously focused on what has now become a large police buildup at the university.
A large police buildup and a large contingent of students throughout that campus there at Columbia. As we watch those live pictures, we are being told that there could be some sort of action on that campus any moment. But for now, that does it for us tonight. Stay with NBC News and NBCNews.com for continuing coverage of this developing story. I'm Gadi Schwartz. Tom Yamas picks up our coverage on Top Story next. Hey, good evening, and we are interrupting this broadcast to bring you this late-breaking information that's happening in Columbia, on Columbia's campus and right outside of Columbia's campus in New York. These are pictures of a large group of NYPD officers making their way towards protesters. See those gates right there, those fences that are being removed by some members of the NYPD? Those were just a few moments ago put there by another large group of protesters that ran out in the middle of the street, a lot of them wearing headscarves, and they put those fences in front of those officers that are advancing, and then they pulled back. Now you see the officers coming up, and they are moving towards the campus en masse. They are stopping right there in front of a building on that sidewalk, on the other side of the street from where our camera is right now. That building, that wall is, from what we understand, Hamilton Hall. This is from the outside of campus looking towards the campus. Hamilton Hall runs alongside the street on the boundary of the campus there. And this is where there is a very large group of protesters. We understand about 60 to 80 protesters inside of Hamilton Hall. I'm going to take a quick listen in because we can hear some shouting. So we're just going to open up the mic there and listen to what we hear. Let's take a listen. We were just hearing NYPD officers moving forward. This is one of several different locations that NYPD officers are engaging with protesters. You heard them there saying, move back, move back, move back, as they walked down the street. That street right there is clear. Just a little bit ago, right before we came on air, that street was filled with some protesters, and they put up those metal barricades, and then they fell back. So this is this. We haven't seen any skirmishes, but this is the skirmish line as it's being drawn live by the New York City Police Department. You've got some paramedics on the back end of that contingent there. And again, over to the left of us is Hamilton Hall. That fence right there, that is the beginning of Columbia's university campus. And then immediately when you walk in that fence to the left is the hall, Hamilton Hall, the home of the administrative building there that was taken over last night shortly after 12 o'clock midnight by a group of protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters on campus. We understand that they may or may not be directly connected with the encampment protesters. The encampment protesters, some of the ones that we've been talking to throughout the day, have put some distance between themselves and what they are doing and those that forcibly took Hamilton Hall overnight last night. But NYPD, you can see them there standing very close to the building that is currently being occupied by about 60 to 80 protesters. Now they are starting to face towards campus. We've got our analyst and good friend, Jim Kavanaugh, who is also monitoring this situation. Jim, I want to bring you in here. You know much better than I at what we're looking at here. And yet, earlier in the day, we were watching some of the images coming from campus. And one of the things that I noticed was something that we saw happen in Seattle before there would be some sort of confrontation with police. And that was protesters carrying around what looked like shields that they had made out of trash cans. From what you see on the screen right now, what do you think we're going to be seeing in the next few minutes here?
Well, I think we'll probably see some announcements. We may not be able to see all the communications that NYPD tries to use with those inside the building, or we could see some public address announcements by the commander on the scene to vacate the building. You know, you have a few minutes to vacate. And, you know, we'll see probably a slow, methodical march inside the building to, you know, make the arrests of the 80 or so protesters. But I think that the seminal point here is what Tom Winter reported with you earlier about the anarchists who are really inciting and in the center of this. And those anarchists really, you know, they latch on to any movement because what they want is, you know, violence, chaos, overthrow the government, fight authority. It doesn't matter what the exact cause is. As long as people rise up for a cause, they will attach themselves to it to sow the violence. And, you know, what Tom Winter was reporting is that NYPD intelligence already knows that those kind of actors have inserted themselves in this building and are kind of trying to lead students who may have a, you know, deep-seated feeling for the cause of citizens in Gaza, and so they feel strongly about it. But anarchists really don't care about the cause, they care about the violence. And if they become the leaders, then, you know, NYPD is going to face down a little more violence. But we don't know that's going to happen yet. I think they do have an overwhelming number of officers, and they know how to handle the people. They're prepared. I think it's a step-by-step thing, Gadi, as they go in. You see the FDNY paramedics there, and they'll be prepared to deal with anything. As I said, the biggest danger of what we know of is probably fire. We don't know that they have any firearms or explosives with them, the anarchists or the students, so we don't know they do. So they have to operate, you know, as if it's a civil disturbance unless they find out they do.
And it looked like we just saw two people taken into custody. We don't know if they were arrested or just taken back, but and actually it looks like we may have one other person with their hands behind their back being led away by the NYPD. So far from this location, which is on the backside of Hamilton Hall, we've seen what looks like at least 3 people, 4 people behind, or 5, 6 people with their hands behind their backs taken into custody by the NYPD. Now, you were just talking about a little bit of the intelligence and maybe the turn in what we've seen on Columbia's campus to what NYPD is saying happened in the last day or so. Earlier today, Deputy Commissioner Rebecca Weiner, she told NBC News that a group that can be best described as anarchists who they said they know of and they are well known to the NYPD have somewhat co-opted what's been happening on that campus. She said that they did not profess any particular ideology or political interest. They seem to be there to create confusion and to engage perhaps violently with police. And she said to NBC that it was the appearance of those actors that are known to NYPD that led to the growing concern for what's happening at Columbia. And we understand that they were expecting the school, Columbia University, to reach out to NYPD, but they were not going to go in until the university had done that. There we see another person being led away. So we're right around about a dozen people that have been taken into custody from this side of Columbia's campus, right outside of Hamilton Hall there. So far, we've got some gates there Jim, when it comes to breaching barricades, getting past the gate should be no problem for the NYPD, but encountering barricades at the front end of Hamilton Hall, how do they proceed?
Well, you know, they have they have the emergency services unit who have the tools and equipment to get through any kind of thing like that. They also have the FDNY, who are just absolute experts. You know, any hook and ladder company can get through any steel door, and they do it every single day. So they can get through the barricade as long as there's not people on the other side of the barricade that are, you know, attacking them. That complicates it. And then attacking them how? So we don't know, like I say, that they have weapons as far as firearms or explosives in there, but they always have the ability for fire. And that is a very dangerous thing because, you know, they'll have the ability to start a fire. And if they start a fire, this thing gets, you know, can get really a mess real fast. I think what you're seeing now, Gadi, is they've gone in and they've got the sort of the low-hanging fruit, the people who are, you know, on the outer edges of the group, or who are, you know, would come out when there was an announcement that you better come out, or, you know, we're gonna come in and arrest you. And so they've gotten people right there on the perimeter, or maybe people in the first room, and they're taking them out. So we're gonna see the police press further through the gates until they meet resistance. They're going to keep going, and it depends on the level of resistance to what the tactics that the unit will use. You know, like I said, they have all the tools at their disposal, but they prefer to ramp up slowly. This is a good sign that arrests are being made, and you being a journalist, of course, you're counting the numbers, and that's what matters.
Yeah.
Because if you think there's 80 in there, and you start to see, you know, 20 out or 30 out, you start to reduce the numbers. And as you reduce the numbers, you sort of reduce the bravery. You know, they're like a gang in the Old West who shows up at the sheriff's jail. You know, they want to rip the prisoner out and hang him. And, you know, when the sheriff stands up to a couple of the key bullies, the thing kind of falls apart. And that's what happens as the numbers get reduced. You know, the courage gets reduced, because the NYPD is not going to lose the courage here. They're going to have the high ground, and the way they're doing it is a professional, methodical, slow encroachment and arrests. So this is a good sign. This is what we want our law enforcement officers to do. And as you said, maybe they'll be taken down, they're given a ticket, a summons, appear in court. Maybe the university will expel them. But, you know, that's okay. That's the way our system works.
And Jim, just to recap for those that are just tuning in, what we're looking at right now is the backside of NYPD action just outside of the campus there at Columbia University. From what we've seen, about 24 protesters have been taken into custody in those zip tie handcuffs, and they've been pulled out of that corner that you're looking at over by the gate. And just to explain what we've seen in the last 10-15 minutes here, the area that you're looking at, that was filled with protesters who ran into the street and started to put up these metal barricades, these metal fences, as the officers approached, saying, move back, move back, move back. They met those fences, they cleared those fences out, and I'm not sure what the holdup is on that corner and what may have been holding up those protesters, but that's where a lot of those protesters ended up congregating. Then we saw officers move into that area. You're now seeing a skirmish line that is separating the place where our camera is, where there are other members of the press. The press has not been allowed onto the university campus. Many of those on the university campus at this point have been deemed to be trespassing. And we have not, from this location, which is on the back side of the campus, the building that you see over to the left, right by the stoplight, is Hamilton Hall. That is the hall where we understand that 60 to possibly 80 protesters went in last night, barricaded it. We don't know how many are in there now, but we have not seen, from this vantage point, officers make their way onto the campus proper. We do know, however, that there were many other officers, SWAT teams, and other police that were getting ready to enter the campus from a bunch of different vantage points. I believe we have Tom Winter, one of our top reporters, on the phone right now, and he's been covering this story very closely. Tom, what can you tell us about what we're seeing here on the screen?
Sure. So the NBC News can be first to report here that the Columbia University has sent a letter to the city of New York that will allow the NYPD to enter their private property and to make any arrests as appropriate. To what Jim suggested, the arrest will probably be along the lines of trespassing. It's unlikely that these individuals even get booked. They're probably just going to be issued effectively a ticket. But if anybody is involved in that hall, they could expect charges of burglary, vandalism. It's also possible that if anybody obviously attempts to injure another student, another person, or a law enforcement officer, then more serious assault charges could be brought as well. So that's what we're looking. But the letter has been sent to top New York City officials, to myself and Jonathan Deitch, and so this gives the NYPD the permission to go onto those grounds. That's what they've been waiting for. I think it's important for people to realize that this situation has been ongoing, obviously, for some time. But the NYPD can't just unilaterally enter private property and arrest people, certainly not those asserting their First Amendment rights of free speech. So they had to be invited by Columbia, and they have to say, look, these individuals that are here, we've told them enough is enough. They need to leave. They need to go home. And the NYPD will make an announcement using their loudspeaker system of a voice saying, if you stay here, you're trespassing, you've been warned. And then after that point, anybody who's still there can obviously be taken into custody. So that's what we're going to start to see happen. We're chasing a number of different threads about the individuals that are involved in this hall. Clearly, the NYPD concerned about a number of anarchist-type individuals. We don't know if they know of all the people that are in there. But the ones that they do, they've been tracking them for some time. And these are people that the police department is concerned about. They're concerned that students are getting co-opted. These individuals don't have any particular ideology or motive, but they do have an ideology and a motive, according to police, to engage in violence and fight police. And I think that's some of the things that they highlighted in their 6 p.m. press conference earlier today, and the video that they released as part of that press conference. So that's where we stand in terms of law enforcement. As far as what will happen next, you've been looking at the officers you see in the hard hats, in the hard helmets, I should say, with the visors. They're part of a group called the Strategic Response Group. This is a group that came up in the early 2010s. It's a group of officers that are trained to respond to a number of different situations, including active shooter, but they're the primary protest riot-type police in New York City. And this is the training that they get, and this is their job, and that's the group that you're seeing amassing outside of the school right now.
Tom, I hate to interrupt you, but I almost see, I know it's not a Bearcat, but I almost see what looks like a large SWAT vehicle that has some sort of, almost like a bridge, it looks like. I'm not sure if you can see these images, but you've got a squad of officers that appear to be getting ready to go into Hamilton Hall from the second story with this this ladder, if you will, that they're putting alongside the building. And again, we are looking at Hamilton Hall. This is where we believe those students have set up barricades, and we know that those students, or many of these protesters, took over last night. But you can see this very fortified police vehicle now setting up to allow these officers to possibly make entry from the second story.
Right here, I'm not going to get in on.
Tom, sorry, I lost you there.
Have me now?
Yeah, I've got you, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Gadi. So what you're looking at is part of the emergency services unit of the New York City Police Department. This is a different level of training. There's a saying inside the NYPD that when we need help, we call police. When police need help, they call the emergency services unit. And that's who's on that truck. That's who runs that truck. I don't want to get into all the capabilities of that vehicle, because, as you know, Gadi, we have rules about describing live police action. And we certainly don't want to get anybody hurt inside or outside of that building. But that is something that they'll use here to successfully be able to go in and make sure nobody's hurt inside, and for the individuals that are trespassing there to be able to make arrests as they feel is appropriate.
First time I've ever seen a police ladder truck in use, and I believe we have Stephen Romo, one of our correspondents, on the ground there. Stephen, I'm not sure if you're at the same vantage point that Antonia was at, or you were at a little bit earlier, but we're watching this NYPD vehicle, armored vehicle, approach Hamilton Hall. Can you see it from where you are?
No, Gadi, I'm actually on the other side of campus where we believe the officers first made entry here. They actually have vehicles that continue to come through here, and they're holding us back a bit from the vantage point that you're able to see. There are students in the buildings around us that are, some of them chanting things down at the NYPD as they do this. Many of them, others are just watching as it happens. We saw, in addition to the vehicle that you are seeing right now and describing, large passenger buses, a few of them. I think I counted 2 to 3 that have moved in here as well, just presumably to have a large passenger space if they do take those 60 to 80 people that are inside the building there. If they do take them into custody, as they said earlier today, the NYPD said that they would to face those variety of charges. So we are penned off here, waiting to be able to move closer. The NYPD says that will be happening soon, although they use the term soon very loosely, very differently than we do in TV news. So we're not exactly sure when that will be, but we do know that there is tension on all sides of campus. In addition to this, people trying to get closer to campus. I've been coming here since October when these protests first started, and the closure of campus is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's impossible to get around pretty much anywhere, and that is because there are large groups of protesters at several of these entrances that do want to get in and are very upset about what they believe is going on right now, which is that the imminent arrest, likely, of these people who are in this building. Gadi?
So, Stephen, let me describe to you what we're seeing right now from the backside of Hamilton Hall. And ordinarily, we don't describe the live actions of police when they are moving into a dangerous situation. That being said, this particular vantage point, the officers don't seem to be doing anything here in secret. In fact, they're doing so in plain view of probably dozens of live streams that we saw earlier from the vantage point that we're at, as well as a wall of news cameras that are facing in their direction. So let me just describe what we're seeing right now. We see 2 officers. One of them has a riot shield and a flashlight. They are on the 2nd story of Hamilton Hall, trying to make entry through a window here using different tools. They have cleared out this entire area of protesters that were on the outside of Hamilton Hall, where it meets the street. But from what we had seen, they had not made entry over into the campus. These officers have now been able to open up this window, and there is a team of officers that is now going inside of Hamilton Hall. We have not seen the student protesters in any of the windows that have been facing this street from when we've been watching, but this is right next to that live shot that you had a little bit earlier, Stephen. Just on that corner right now, we've got officers that are making their way inside of Hamilton Hall on the street. We've got officers who are wearing visors. We've got more officers who are starting to make their way up ladders, and it doesn't look like they've met any resistance going into Hamilton Hall, again, from the 2nd story, making their way into a window that they have opened. Meanwhile, on the street, we saw protesters on the outside of Columbia University try to set up a makeshift barricade very quickly as the NYPD started marching down the street, telling everybody to move back. They quickly took that down, and they arrested about 24 protesters. Have you seen protesters arrested from your vantage point on the other side of Columbia?
No, over here on the Broadway side, I've not seen anyone directly taken into custody, Gadi, but right now I can tell you there are another fleet of officers, I'd estimate between 50 and 75 riot gear that are pouring into the campus right now. And they are headed toward Hamilton Hall as we speak. An additional point to bring up about the situation inside the building, Hamilton Hall, right now, is talking to students. They're telling me that there are small rooms, like different offices and small rooms that they are concerned about being dark and the police officers encountering students there. One of the many things they are worried about going on right now inside Hamilton Hall, which is possibly unfolding as we speak.
Yeah, it's like you could see the live stream that I know you don't have in front of you, but as you were describing that, we can see darkened windows and we can see the flashlights as officers search through the second story of Hamilton Hall from where we are, looking for any possible protesters that have barricaded themselves inside. Again, we haven't seen a flurry of activity. We haven't seen a rush by the NYPD. It doesn't appear to be any confrontation that is unfolding as we speak, because normally, even from the outside, you can see the tension rise among the ranks when you hear some of those things come in through the radio. But we're still seeing NYPD officers making entry from the second story there. Now, you're on the ground there, and this is the most difficult question to guess, if you will. But so far, out of all of the protesters you've seen, are we talking hundreds? Are we talking thousands? How big of a crowd is the NYPD going to encounter here?
That is a great question and a difficult one, Gadi, because of the closures that are going on campus. There are different pools of protesters at each of these different gates. For example, I'm by 114th Street, and there's a large pool of protesters at that entrance to campus. And I look down to 115th Street, the same thing, these barricades, another group of officers, another group of protesters, a smaller group there. But I look down farther and I see the same thing, another group of officers and another large group of protesters. The ones that are closer to the campus entrance are definitely more heated, perhaps because they can see what's going on. I'm not exactly certain of why, but they are giving the officers, I don't know, I want to say they're just talking to the officers a lot more, showing their aggravation, I guess is the best way to put it. And it's hard to estimate for that reason exactly how many protesters there are. And that doesn't even include the Amsterdam Avenue side of campus, which is also, we know, still an active situation much like this. And they can actually see Hamilton Hall. So I'm not even certain of what they're facing in that degree.
And Stephen, we're starting to see some of the lights come on the second story of Hamilton Hall there, underneath some of the Free Palestine flags that were flying that have been put there by some of the protesters. Those officers continue to make entry, and we are talking scores of officers now, probably around 30, 40, upwards of that number, all making their way into Hamilton Hall. We haven't been able to see over to campus and whether or not they are making entry on the campus side over where those wrought iron gates were, but there sure are a large number of the NYPD that are making their way directly into Hamilton Hall. Again, Hamilton Hall is the hall that was taken over by protesters last night around 1 a.m., a little after 12 o'clock. Hamilton Hall is the offices of the administration for the University of Columbia. Columbia University administrative offices are in that building that you're seeing right now. And Stephen, we were talking a little bit earlier tonight. Hamilton Hall, this has a history when it comes to being occupied by protesters who are speaking out about war, right?
Yeah, a long history of it. I thought it had only been a few instances until I actually looked more into it. Several times throughout history, student groups have occupied Hamilton Hall for a variety of reasons, most notably 1968, to protest the Vietnam War and also the planned campus expansion into the surrounding areas, which now that exact incident from 1968 is featured on a website from the Library of Columbia. They've embraced, it seems, that part is an important part of the campus history. And it's uncertain how history will see exactly what's going on right now, but I would wager that eventually this, too, will be something that is remembered as part of Columbia's history. And as we were talking, Gadi, the group of protesters I mentioned has been forced to move, so a police bus can move through. A large police passenger vehicle, NYPD, is now making its way on campus as well. I believe that could be the fourth one I've seen making its way on campus.
And Stephen, where you are tensions high? Are people interacting with the police officers there?
Yes, they have been chanting intermittently, and some of them have been trying to engage the officers, trying to talk to them, ask them how they can do this, ask them how they can support Israel. They've singled out NYPD and made statements of chants calling the NYPD the KKK. I've heard that as well. It is tense, but for the most part, it seems like the NYPD is not responding to them unless they try to make their way past the barricade. So it seems like for the most part, the NYPD is trying not to engage with them from what I've seen. But tensions for certain, especially when another vehicle or another group of officers goes onto campus through this entrance, you definitely hear it from the protesters here.
And again, there's been a lot of confusion throughout the day. When we say protesters, there may be different groups of protesters. There are protesters that have taken over Hamilton Hall. There are protesters that have organized a very large encampment at Columbia. I know that the ones that had organized that encampment in Columbia, Reuters was reporting that they were seeking 3 demands from Columbia: the divestment from companies supporting Israel's government, greater transparency in university finances, and amnesty for students and faculty that have been disciplined over the protests. Stephen, is it still kind of confusing in terms of the connection between those protesters and the protesters that are inside of Hamilton Hall, or have we gotten any more clarity there?
Yeah, a question many people are asking. We've had groups that have put up protests since October. We've had Students for Justice in Palestine that they have led the first one that I was covering for NBC, the demonstration here. They said they've not been involved in the planning of the occupation of Hamilton Hall. We know that, but you bring up a very good point about the demonstrators and protesters, because not only do we have the tent encampment on campus, and we have the people that are occupying Hamilton Hall, we also have these groups, these apparently outside groups that are here to support one or maybe both of the groups that are currently on campus who are not able to get on campus because you have to have a student ID in order to do that. So these are yet another group of protesters who are outside. And to use the term protesters, to be very specific about it, some of them are likely just spectators, because what is happening here is an unusual sight to behold. So many NYPD vehicles and more continue to come in. So there are people who are likely here not showing support for one side or the other, but just to see what is happening in their own neighborhood. Those definitely are not the ones that are screaming things at the NYPD, I would wager, but that there are a great number of people here right now just to observe or to have their voices heard for exactly what's happening.
And Stephen, throughout the week, we've been hearing reports of anti-Semitism at some of the protests where Jewish students that we've heard from say that they have been verbally assaulted or been barred from getting to class or been barred from moving around their campus and feel threatened by a lot of these large encampments. Have you seen any of that at Columbia?
I've not directly seen any of it since back in October when we first started talking to students, Jewish students as well. They've told us of incidents like that, of tense incidents, and we've had students who are supporting Palestinians tell us that they have been doxxed and they have experienced hateful remarks on campus as well. That tension dating back to October 7th when the war started, and it has continued to heat up since then. Tensions have continued to percolate, and I would say, from my perspective in covering this, Columbia seems to have been on the forefront of that tension from the very beginning, and it has continued to simmer, and we've seen it continue to boil over, and there's been dissatisfaction from both sides at different points for the response from administrators. And then, as of last night, as we heard from the NYPD earlier, things just took such a turn whenever these people broke into Hamilton Hall to occupy, which, by the way, as you mentioned earlier, that the NYPD saying that there are outside agitators that they believe are violating school policy by being there in the first place, and to also be trying to stir things up, if you will, for the people in Hamilton Hall. So a long time coming for this to reach this point, a lot of small escalations and then a major escalation last night.
And Stephen, we just got a statement from Columbia University on why they have called in the NYPD. And we just, as we show you these live images from Columbia, from Hamilton Hall there, I'm just going to read them to you. This is from Columbia University again. We regret that protesters have chosen to escalate the situation through their actions after the university learned overnight that Hamilton Hall had been occupied, vandalized, and blockaded. We were left with no choice. Columbia public safety personnel were forced out of the building, and a member of our facilities team was threatened. We will not risk the safety of our community or the potential for further escalation. The leadership team, including the Board of Trustees, met through the night and into the early morning, consulting with security experts and law enforcement to determine the best plan to protect our students and the entire Columbia community. We made the decision early in the morning that this was a law enforcement matter and that the NYPD were best positioned to determine and execute an appropriate response. We believe that the group that broke in and occupied the building is led by individuals who are not affiliated with the university. Sadly, this dangerous decision followed more than a week of what had been productive discussions with representatives of the West Lawn Encampment. We severely curtailed the number of people on Morningside campus starting Tuesday morning. Over the course of the day, we updated our community on access to campus buildings and will continue to do so through the next few days. The decision to reach out to the NYPD was in response to the actions of the protesters, not the cause they are championing. And we have made it clear that the life of campus cannot be endlessly interrupted by protesters who violate the rules and the law. Early Tuesday, protesters chose to escalate to an alarming and untenable situation, including by vandalizing property, breaking doors and windows, blockading entrances, and forcing our facilities and public safety workers out. And we are responding appropriately, as we have long made clear we would. The safety of our community, especially our students, remains top priority. And joining us live is Antonia Hilton, who was standing at the vantage point that we're now showing you live on your screen there. Antonia, what's the latest from where you're standing?
Well, Gadi, we watched at least a dozen officers enter through a kind of crane and ramp through a window into Hamilton Hall. They've now lifted up some of the shades that the students and protesters who are inside had used to block visibility into the building throughout the day. We have not yet seen any of the actual protesters themselves. We assume the officers are in the building, going from space to space and seeing what they encounter there. Our understanding at this time is that there is a combination of students and potentially outside actors who are involved. That comes from the NYPD. They say, per their intel, that they believe that there are outside agitators, sort of professional protesters who are in a way advising the students who led them into this action that started at 12:30 a.m. last night with sounds of a window smashing, students grabbing metal gates and furniture and trash cans and barricading doors. At one point, a scuffle and an altercation between students who tried to block the protesters from being able to do this. And the major concern has been that since they entered and they blocked many of the security cameras inside, that there really would be a lack of clarity about who and what the officers would encounter. And for people on all sides of this is really a worst case scenario, Gadi, for the Jewish students here on campus who have said that they have felt concern, fear, intimidation, harassment. They feel that the administration hasn't done enough to help them and that this is an escalation that is their fault. Then on the side of pro-Palestinian students who were at the table trying to negotiate and who say that they were threatened at times with further action by the NYPD, threatened at one point with the National Guard, that they believe that the talks fell apart because of this, that there really was no middle ground that could be found. So that is now why we find ourselves in a position where there are hundreds of NYPD officers in riot gear, in all kinds of trucks outside, not just on Amsterdam and 116th where I am now, but really around the entire perimeter of the Morningside Classic campus, the really beating heart of the campus of Columbia here. And there are students who are watching from balconies, windows, neighbors who have come down, who have been chanting, "Shame on you, NYPD, KKK." I mean, the intensity, the anger is very present on the ground right now, Gadi.
And we just got this letter from Columbia to the NYPD that Tom Winter was telling us about a little bit earlier. The first part basically says that they regret to inform and request assistance from the NYPD, but they say that they've been given no choice. But there's this part at the end that I want to read to you, Antonio, because I want to get your thoughts on this. They say that, with the utmost regret, we request NYPD's help to clear all individuals from Hamilton Hall and all campus encampments. As part of this process, we understand that the NYPD plans to use its LRAD technology, L-R-A-D, LRAD technology, to inform participants in the encampments that they must disperse. Now, LRAD, as I understand it, those are those long-range acoustic devices that are extremely loud. Sometimes they're used for crowd control. Have you seen or heard any of those in the background from where you are?
We heard one message, and that was to protesters who were lined up actually at the gate behind me here. There were a mix of students and non-students, residents, neighbors here who had come to show support to the protesters inside. And they were all informed through a pretty loud audio message, I couldn't quite tell where it was coming from at the time, that they needed to disperse, otherwise they were facing arrest. And that's part of what's contributed to the anger, Gadi, because those same people have now, they've pushed themselves in front of businesses and apartment buildings to both the left and right of me. There are students who tell me that they were trying to make their way back home to comply with shelter-in-place orders. They have been unable to actually get across to the parts of campus that they need to get to in order to get home. So there are a lot of people feeling like they're sort of trapped as part of this spectacle, whether they want to be or not right now, and it's contributing to that anger. The faculty are also incredibly angry, and they released their own statement making clear tonight that if someone is injured as part of whatever takes place in this building right now, as officers enter and continue to do so, that they are going to lay the blame for that at the feet of Manoush Shafiq, who's the president of Columbia, and the person who would have had to invite the NYPD to come in and begin this action. They believe that, and frankly, their views, even though these are professors who range on political and geopolitical beliefs, they are in many ways on the side of the pro-Palestinian protesters in feeling that the university didn't do enough to get talks to a productive place. And to give you kind of a foil to what we're seeing here, take Brown University, for example, where the encampment was just shut down because the university had productive talks with those students and then agreed to bring the question of divestment to a vote to the Board of Governors so that they would at least show the students that they were discussing it. That was enough for those protesters. They packed up, they said great, and it looks like Brown is going to be able to have commencement as planned. That is what many people on all sides hoped was going to happen here, and it's very clear from the scene we're seeing tonight that that failed.
How far did those talks get, do we know?
Well, they went on for days, about 7, 8 or maybe even more days. And according to Jelani Cobb, a member of that negotiating team and the dean of the Columbia Journalism School, they were trying to bring those talks back to life just hours ago. They were hoping that they could convince the university to not do this, that they could get back to the table, buy a little bit more time. But he texted me not that long ago saying those talks were dead. Shortly after he said that, we started to see more and more officers arrive in riot gear, and it became very, very clear what was going to happen. And, you know, people are feeling exasperated. I met one mom earlier today who told me that she, even though she wasn't scared and didn't necessarily think that her freshman child was at risk of being harmed, she felt like this is just too far. This escalation between the administration and the students has just gone a step too far, and she wanted her child off campus. And so that's really the question now. Even after what happens tonight, they clear Hamilton Hall. The university says they've solved the problem. Well, there are a whole lot of angry and disappointed people who've lost faith in them. They're getting ready for commencement on May 15th. I don't think we're necessarily going to wake up tomorrow to a campus that has been healed. That's really the issue here, Gadi.
I do want to ask, and I know this is such a hard number to ballpark, but it's difficult because we don't have aerial images of what's been happening there at Columbia. We don't know how large that encampment is tonight. If you had to ballpark it, how many protesters do you think are actively engaged in these demonstrations on campus right now? Is it scores? Is it hundreds? What's your best guess?
I would say hundreds. If I had additional vantage points, it might be as much as 1,000 or more, because that's what we've seen at other points. You know, when students were fearful that the NYPD would return after, say, yesterday's 2 p.m. initial deadline for the encampment to shut down, there were tons of students, at least 1,000 or more, who were circling the central campus that day. Tonight, just where I am at 116th in Amsterdam, there are hundreds of people around. We can see students watching at times from windows nearby and from a balcony around the corner from me here. And then we know, because we have an NBC crew on the other side, that there is an entirely different presence there. And as I mentioned, some students who say that they've in a way been trapped, unable to get back to the part of campus where they need to go in order to follow the rule that has been set, the request for them to shelter in place. And so there is a very active, fluid situation here on the ground. We also know from our NBC News intern, Issa Farfan, who had access to the campus at points today, that there were hundreds of people out in the lawn, still at times part of protests or an encampment, and that students believe there are about 60 people inside the building. So in total, we're looking at a very large portion. I mean, the undergraduate community here is about 6,000, 36,000 or so for the larger Columbia community, including graduate students and other programs. But, you know, just if there's 1,000 or so people out here tonight, that's a solid percentage of the campus, and people who would be at risk of you know, either being upset by and in a way affected by what's about to transpire, if not very directly impacted by the NYPD's presence. You know, you have to remember Hamilton Hall right here is right next to residential buildings. There are people who, whether they want to or not, are essentially going to experience this tonight, no matter what their beliefs are, who they are, just simply because of where they were told they had to live and where their room is. They are going to hear and experience this probably late into the night now, Gadi.
And Antonia, just speaking of the lay of the land here, so that's Hamilton Hall behind your shoulder, and then the gates that we saw those protesters taken into custody a little bit earlier. Those gates, we saw protesters on the other side of the gates on campus proper that seemed to be yelling at police, and then I didn't see if police had made it onto the campus over there. Had they opened that gate up, and are there police that have now pushed their way into campus? And how far are you from the encampment that's behind you?
We are not far at all from the encampment. Parts of it are, you know, just beyond the gate that you see behind me here. What I can tell you is from our vantage point, police officers entered Hamilton Hall through a window. So they set up this ramp, this massive truck. Officers were riding on top, more than a dozen of them, and they entered through that window. They have not been using the gate, but we know from our crews that are on other points, other sides of the campus, that officers entered using other methods and are likely approaching this building from multiple entry points right now, Gadi.
And from what we've seen in those windows, we've got those windows open now. We've got the lights on. Have you seen any any sign of protesters?
We have not seen them. We have not seen them for hours. Earlier today, you could see them at points unfurling a new banner. One went up to the roof, and they were waving around a Palestinian flag for quite a while. And so you could see sometimes shadows behind some of the shades, and so you knew people were in there. But since the officers entered that window there, we have not seen someone dragged out of one of the windows come out back through the gate. That remains to be seen. And there were a lot of questions for people here because one of the things protesters did when they entered was use trash bags to cover up security cameras. So it's not very clear to us how much did the NYPD know about what they were going to encounter when they got inside. Did they have any visibility? We do know that they have been flying drones for hours, even before this action was officially announced. They clearly were getting a vantage point of the roof, trying to look at different entry points to the building itself. But in terms of what they know about what the students and the outside agitators, the non-affiliates who may be in there, we don't know what they know about what they have been up to for the last several hours. And when we've reached out to people involved in this movement, people who we know may be in there, they have not been speaking with media today. It has not been easy to get access to them and to get a sense of what their plan was.
And Antonia, so we've got the people chanting behind you. Are they behind your vantage point now? It seems like there's 3 different barriers.
There are multiple barriers. I have protesters and students over here who have been pushed by a barrier back towards some of the buildings on the opposite side of the street. There are many people lined up on the opposite side as well, and there are some businesses over here. And people actually started sitting down, grabbing coffees and snacks from a nearby cafe and getting some of the cafe's outdoor seats to basically have a front row seat to history. And they were just seated there waiting for hours to see what would happen. They're still there. And some of these are the people who were originally protesting right in front of the gate for quite a long while this afternoon. But it was when that audio message went out informing all of them that they had to get away from the gate or risk arrest that we saw them push back in all directions, Gadi.
Antonia Hilton, we really appreciate your coverage. Just again, if you're joining us, we're looking at live coverage outside of Hamilton Hall. That is the hall at Columbia University that was taken over by students, by protesters a little bit earlier in the morning last night. We are watching as NYPD has made entry into that building as well as the campus there. These are live pictures coming from Columbia University.
This is an NBC News special report.
Good evening, I'm Gadi Schwartz, and we are coming on the air tonight with breaking news in New York City, where police in riot gear have entered Columbia University's campus and have begun taking protesters into custody. Now, this comes just hours after New York officials said the protests there had been co-opted by outside agitators. Columbia has been at the center of a pro-Palestinian protest movement at college campuses across the country, with some protesters storming and occupying a building on the school's main campus overnight. Now the school has asked the NYPD for assistance, giving officers a green light to make lawful arrests on the school's property. That concludes this NBC special report. We're going to have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, and on tomorrow's show Today. I'm Gadi Schwartz. Thank you so much for watching. And coming back now to these breaking pictures that we're watching outside of Hamilton Hall at Columbia University in New York City. You've got the NYPD. There is a skirmish line that you're looking at right in front of you. That is a skirmish line right in front of the university just a little while ago. To the left of those officers, you're starting to see it in the screen there. That is a bear cat or a bear vehicle from the NYPD, a heavily fortified vehicle. And on the top side of that, you're seeing a ladder. That ladder was used by scores and scores of NYPD officers making their way into Hamilton Hall from the second story. Those skirmish lines now wrapping around this side of the university there. We've seen officers making their way onto campus. We're now seeing emergency crews coming in, ambulances coming in. These are those images from earlier when the first officers made entry into Hamilton Hall there. The lights were off, those officers going inside. And then after that, it was a very, very large contingent of NYPD officers making their way inside. We have not seen any of those officers come out, but we have seen the lights on the second story turned on. So far, we have not seen any of the protesters that were inside of Hamilton Hall taken into custody and brought out. But I do want to bring in Mark Claxton. He is a retired NYPD detective. Mark, this is the first time I've seen an armored vehicle with a ladder like that used to make entry into a second story there at Hamilton Hall. Can you take us through what officers may be encountering as they make their way into the building there?
Well, undoubtedly, there's been prior surveillance, and based on information that's come out, there's been a lot of surveillance over the past several days by the NYPD, since they can get a lay of the land. And I wouldn't doubt that they had some maybe intelligence information from actually inside on campus itself, so they would have some valuable information if it came to the point, as it came to tonight, that they would make an entry onto campus at the request of Columbia University. So they're going to use all of the resources in order to make as safe an entry onto campus as possible. They're going to deploy the strategic response group and other tactical units who are quite accustomed to making unusual entries, dynamic entries, who can establish a perimeter, as you are seeing around the campus of Columbia, perimeter established, so emergency vehicles can make their way around the campus itself. They could bring in some additional resources. They can have emergency response vehicles, ambulances available if necessary. And they chose to make an entry based on the shots that you've been showing. They chose to make an entry in a second floor window, I'm sure because that was the point of least resistance. They could have decided to try to go through one of the many entrance gates, but there would have been like a back and forth, a push and pull situation. It could have gotten unnecessarily physical. So they entered through the point of least resistance and made a tactical entry using the second floor. And you saw members of what appeared to be strategic response group making their way into the building itself. I think based on all the information that's come out, and even the earlier press conference held by the mayor and the NYPD, that they were just waiting for a request from Columbia in order to make an entry onto the campus and to facilitate restoring order.
Marcus, and Mark, as part of the letter that we just saw go from the university to NYPD, we did see mention that the university was acknowledging that the NYPD may be using an LRAD to clear protesters, or at least make an announcement. Can you talk us through what an LRAD is, what it's used for, and could we see it used not just for making an announcement, but possibly for crowd control and crowd disbursement?
Yes, for all of the above, as a matter of fact. And I think the idea behind that is to use whatever technology is available that could minimize direct physical contact. This way you want to mitigate even the possibility that there are assaults or kind of physical altercations that occur quite normally when you have these large demonstrations. In the past several days, there have been a couple of instances that's been reported of police officers who were on campus having to deal with bottles being thrown and individuals and going hands-on. Fortunately, there haven't been any reported serious injuries as a result of that. So you want to use whatever instruments and implements you have in your arsenal to minimize that human contact and yet and still either communicate effectively a message, an effective demand, indicating what the desire of Columbia University is in this particular case, without having someone walking through with a bullhorn and placing themselves in harm's way, and perhaps agitating a situation that is already very tense. And you just want to avoid those kind of direct contacts.
And what is an LRAD? What is that technology?
Well, the NYPD's been working on a lot of different technology over the past, a lot of the robotics technology, as you indicated earlier, talking about the drones that are used itself. So you want to have opportunity to have video, live video feeds, and have some audio capabilities. This way you can clearly communicate messages back and forth. So that's what that technology is used for.
Now, the officers that we saw go in with the khaki pants, and it looked like there were dozens and dozens of those officers. Are they part of the specialized group, or are they going in to make those arrests?
Yeah, those police officers they appear to be part of the strategic response group.
Got it.
Specially trained officers who know how to handle these large crowd control situations, who are trained and on dealing with direct crowd conflict, and also with making these type of tactical or dynamic entries. So they appear to be part of strategic response group, the same group of officers that a few weeks ago, one of them was fatally wounded, Jonathan Diller. But that same group, the strategic response group, is on the front line for this Columbia University incident.
And I hate to ask this logistics question, but we just don't know how many protesters are on campus. What is the capacity for making mass arrests on a night like this in New York City?
The capacity, the NYPD is always fully prepared in the case that there has to be mass arrests made. There's a history of large-scale demonstrations in New York, and there's always been a capacity to make those large-scale arrests. What is most commonly done is you try to just kind of mitigate the situation. You want to minimize those people who are placed in custody to those who actually are physically assaultive or something along those lines. You don't want to walk through a legitimate demonstration of protest and just indiscriminately start arresting people. I think what's happened here is that Columbia University has made it clear to individuals on the campus, hey, if you are not authorized to be here, and no one is authorized to be here at this time, you have to leave campus under threat of arrest. And that gave the police department the authority to come in and arrest individuals who refuse to leave. They could be arrested for trespass, and if they are engaged in some other additional infractions, they could be charged with those things as well.
Detective, we really appreciate your insight into all this. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to turn now to Antonia Hilton, who is outside of the campus there. And Antonia, I don't know if you can hear me, but it looks like you've got a guest with us. Antonia, what can you tell us?
Hey, Gadi. Yes, I'm here with a faculty member, a professor of sociology at Barnard named Debbie Becker. And the faculty have been as affected by all this as the students have been. And so I wanted people to hear from them directly, especially because of the faculty letter that came out earlier this evening, in which many of the faculty expressed their concern about the NYPD entering campus and really signaling to the administration that if something happens, if any of the students are injured tonight, that they are putting the blame on the university's feet. So I want to hear from you, Professor Becker. How are you feeling? What is it like for you to watch this unfold tonight?
Thank you for that introduction. It's an incredibly sad day. It's a sad day for me as a faculty member at Barnard and Columbia. It's a sad day for our students at Columbia and Barnard. And frankly, it's a sad day for American history, for world history. I don't think that Columbia is going to... Faculty are surprised. We're surprised, and in some ways we're not surprised because we've seen this coming. The administration has been keeping us out of trying to help the students express themselves freely for 6 months now. They have, ever since this conflict began, they have continuously suppressed student speech, and faculty have continued to say we need to support them to be able to have difficult conversations. That's what faculty do. That's what higher education is about. And instead, the administration has continued to suppress them and discipline them and increasingly use violence. And we saw them use the police without our faculty senate support just a week ago. And now it's unconscionable. They're sending in hundreds of police after our students. And all day long, we asked for the Our Senate worked with the administration to try to make sure that faculty could even just come on campus to be a witness and to help mediate, and they shut us out.
Are there faculty members in there right now?
We have not been allowed in there since 8 o'clock this morning.
Wow.
None of us.
How do you think it got to this point? Negotiations, they had faculty members represented, administrators, there were students who were part of these conversations, and we see how those conversations went at Brown, where now the encampment has closed down and the university has agreed to take this to a vote. So there were clearly other alternatives and different ways this could have gone. Why do you think Columbia has landed here?
I think that's exactly right, that there are many other places where negotiations happened. There was a settlement. We didn't have to see this kind of violence. And instead, the administration took this path. It was not a necessary path. And I think the administration has been making choices for months to go along with the demands of the MAGA Republicans and the right to ruin our universities, to turn our universities into a police state and to repress our students' speech. And they're just following that playbook.
So you think some of this is political?
I think a lot of it is political. This all started after the congressional hearing a few weeks ago, where, I mean, when I say this all started, the bringing in of the police to arrest our students started right after President Shafiq was in Congress and felt like she needed to show them exactly what they were asking for.
But even many of those congressional Republicans are now calling on her to resign. Pro-Palestinian students are calling on her to resign. Jewish students who say they've been harassed and threatened tell me they're disappointed and don't feel safe here on campus. Does she have support? Is someone in her corner right now?
When President Shafiq went to Congress, she neither did what the Republicans wanted her to do, which I think, let me take that back. When she went to Congress, there was no way for her to satisfy the Republicans. The Republicans already wanted, not just the Republicans, almost the entire committee. The people in Congress wanted to show that they could take down a university. It's not about President Shafiq. It's about taking down higher education. So they wanted to show that they had power over the president of an elite university. At the same time, she failed to stick up for what higher education should be. So she didn't she didn't talk about academic freedom. She didn't stand up for freedom of expression. She threw faculty under the bus. She threw students under the bus. She made promises about anti-Semitism that are unconscionable. So I think it's fair to say that she has very little support. But she could have had support if she had stood up for higher education and what we stand for.
So where does Columbia go tomorrow morning?
I would hope that we learn a lesson. Clearly, we didn't learn a lesson from 1968, but I would hope that our administration learns a lesson and listens to its faculty and its students. Frankly, most of our students are really destroyed by the way they've been treated for the last 6 months, and by this incident in particular. It's just going to be worse. So there's going to need to be a lot of healing, and the only way to have a lot of healing is to have a dramatic change. And we actually have a similar problem perhaps a worse problem at Barnard College. We just had a vote of no confidence against our President Rosenberry for using really incredibly harsh disciplinary tactics against our students. When the police came in after the congressional hearing, she suspended our students and evicted them, sent them out on the streets of New York, without notice. They came out of getting arrested, had no place to go, had 15 minutes to collect their things. So our students at Barnard and Columbia are quite disenchanted, but they have a lot of spirit. They have a lot of community. They've assured me that they've developed a lot of unity and community through these tough times, and I have faith in our students. And I think if we can make a dramatic change in the way administration treats us and gives faculty a voice, allows faculty to actually participate in higher education, which is what we do, let the faculty and the students lead higher education and let administration support us, then we'll be on a good road ahead.
Thank you, Professor Becker. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks. Gadi, you heard it right there. This has been the mood, and I've spoken to faculty members through message, through text all day, who really echo what she just said there, that there is a feeling of disappointment, a feeling that even after this entire building is cleared tonight, that people will wake up tomorrow and still feel all the fracturing that has happened on this campus in recent weeks. Gadi.
Antonio, such an important perspective there from that faculty member. We thank you for that. And another important perspective that we have not heard from directly in a little bit of time here is the student perspective. So joining us now is Isa Farfan. She is a student journalist and a senior at Columbia's Barnard College. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask, from your vantage point today, what have you seen?
Yeah, so I've been on the ground basically since 4 a.m. Actually, no, since before 4 a.m. I was out last night at 12:30 in the morning when students broke into Hamilton Hall, and I stayed until 4 a.m. I went home, woke up at 8, got back out again. But what I've seen is this like massive mobilization. Huge numbers of students coming out and to picket around the encampment that students were notified, if they were in, they were going to be suspended. And then again, I saw so many students around Hamilton Hall protecting those who are running the occupation inside, though my knowledge is that the people inside are an autonomous group. And now I've just been watching arrests for the last hour and a half. I watched a human chain be broken up trying to block the arrested students in a correction bus. They were arrested. They resisted arrest. It got really chaotic for a second, and now I'm standing here, and this is the boiling point.
And you're, just to make this clear, are you on campus right now, or are you on the outskirts of the campus?
Yeah, so right now I'm on 114th and Amsterdam. I'm not being allowed by police to return home. I'm actually supposed to be off of work right now, but the cops have told me I can't go home until further notice. So I'm out here trying to get back to my dorm.
And so a lot of these arrests that we've seen happen, we were showing live just a little while ago, those were happening off campus as well. So the arrests that you were just describing, did those happen on campus or off campus?
Yeah, these were off-campus arrests. I heard, at least from the human chain that was trying to block, the NYPD from getting through, they said they were not Columbia affiliates. And the arrests I saw, and I would guess about 24 people were arrested, just based on the size of the lines and the pictures I've taken. Those happened before I was notified that police had entered Hamilton, so it's safe to assume they're not affiliates.
And when you were there yesterday and throughout the night last night, and you saw Hamilton Hall, what did you gather from the group that had made it in there? You said that they may not be affiliated with the encampment outside. What do you know for certain there?
Yeah, so today I spoke with organizers of Students for Justice in Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, and also the Columbia Apartheid Divest. And they're telling me that these students are not endorsed by their group specifically. They're not part of that movement. They might be affiliated with them in some ways and have been involved in their protests, but this movement itself, this occupation, is not part of that SJP, JVP, CUAD call for divestment.
And do you know anything about John Jay Hall?
Yeah, John Jay is a residence hall and a dining hall. And it's what I'm seeing on Instagram right now from SJP is that they're telling students not to leave. So students who live there, students who are eating there when this started are kind of stuck there.
Got it. So yeah, we're getting conflicting reports that students either are barricaded inside of John Jay Hall or are sheltering in place. Do you have any clarity on that?
From my knowledge and just the university communications, I would say that I am aware of only sheltering in place. I haven't heard about barricading, but the university has told students to shelter in place and says that, they could be subject to discipline if they do not abide by that.
Got it. And thank you so much for staying with this on the phone. I want to read you this as well because it's just coming in. So we've been seeing reports that NYPD allegedly may have used tear gas. However, NYPD is denying the use of tear gas. They just released a statement saying that they used a distraction device to get officers into Columbia, saying that they made entry into the building, into Hamilton Hall, and they're describing the building as very heavily fortified. The doorways were blocked by soda machines, by couches, by plywood. When you were there yesterday and you saw some of those barricades going up overnight and into the early morning, what kind of fortifications did you see?
Yeah, so there's this area outside of Hamilton Hall that has a bunch of benches where students are usually eating, taking their food to go. And they took the benches and trash cans from that area and used it to fortify the doors at the front.
And if you had to guess, how many protesters do you think were on campus today? And I know that's a very difficult question, but if you had to ballpark it.
Yeah, so unfortunately my access to campus today was like heavily restricted. I'm a Barnard student. I don't live on campus, so they didn't let me in. But I'm told that about 60 protesters are inside of Hamilton Hall, and I'm assuming hundreds more based on who I saw last night, like several hundred students.
And what's the sense from students that may not be participating in the protests?
Yeah, I think a lot of people I know who were involved in the protests since this escalation have sort of not like disengaged themselves. You know, people are going home. This is the final season. This is dead week. People are supposed to be like silently studying. So I think people have kind of slipped into the incognito mode. But students remain either, you know, kind of where they stood at the beginning, against or for, but students haven't changed their level of involvement, you know, pending suspension risks and arrest risk.
And we're starting to see some images of these buses coming by, those buses showing what appear to be a lot of the detained protesters inside that are being taken away by the NYPD. Those were protesters that were taken away from a different vantage point from the camera that you're seeing right now, but it is a bus full of protesters making their way out of that area. I do want to ask, when it comes to just student reaction to the police presence that we're seeing and this large police force making their way onto Columbia's campus after days and days of what looked like progress being made in talks. What's the sense from the student perspective?
Yeah, I think, you know, students feel really betrayed. The students who are on campus are vocally opposed to the cops entering. They're, you know, saying things like oink, oink, piggy, piggy, like get a real job, stop arresting children is what I've heard from, you know, protests out here tonight. But I think students feel really abandoned by the university. And that's what I'm hearing from students on the ground.
Are there students that give any credence to this, these statements by NYPD and this theory that they've put forth that a lot of what we're seeing today has been outside agitators and anarchists coming in and co-opting some of the protest and some of the message from the demonstrators earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be based on my knowledge on campus, they've restricted access to only CUID holders. So I think it's very unlikely that it's like a majority led from outside agitators. But this group is identifying as an autonomous group that isn't affiliated with these sort of Columbia adjacent groups. And now they face expulsion. So I guess on a technicality, they are no longer recognized as students.
Now, given the tension that you've seen, given the escalation that we're seeing tonight, and given just the passion of a lot of the demonstrators that we've seen, even if the campus is clear tonight, even if Hamilton Hall is clear tonight, what do you see happening in the next coming weeks?
Yeah, I mean, in my own personal experience as a student here, and I'm about to graduate too, I cannot imagine any sense of calm coming back before graduation. I don't know if I'll have a graduation. This university is unrecognizable to me. I'm honestly like in awe and in shock constantly these past few days, and I honestly don't have the ability to imagine a campus that isn't, you know, surrounded by the NYPD and, you know, students fearing getting doxxed, and it's been this for months and months and months, and I think it's going to take some serious effort from administration and whatever happens next to restore any sense of normalcy here.
Do you have friends at other universities that are seeing what's happening at Columbia and worried about what's going to happen on their campus?
Yeah, I mean, I have friends who go to UC schools in California and some other private colleges on the West Coast, and they, their students have kind of co-opted this movement started at Columbia, and so they were checking in with me at the beginning, and now they're sending me updates from their campuses, and it sounds very similar to me. I'm not too familiar with like the specifics of their movements, but the timeline is like Columbia is at the center of all of this.
What do you think it's going to take to de-escalate all of this?
Okay, that's a hard question for me. But I do think that with dead week now, finals, once students don't have housing, our numbers are limited. And there might be less need for police presence. But I don't know what is happening in the encampment right now. I'm told earlier today that there are students still in that original encampment. It has not been disbanded as of this moment and my current knowledge. But I think the summer vacation may be the only thing to escalate it for now, but I don't know. I really don't know.
And if I understand this, and I'm not sure if you fall into this category, but we've got summer vacation right around the corner for graduates like you. This is graduation that you may miss. And this also coincides with a lot of students not seeing graduation because of COVID, right? Is that something that you've heard a lot of or possibly experienced yourself?
Yeah, I am part of the class who didn't have a COVID high school graduation. But the students I'm talking to, my friends, I think people understand that this is bigger than our graduation. And this, at some point, this becomes expected if you've never had a graduation. I know I myself graduated from my parents' car from high school, and regardless, my friends' families and my family, we're all going to celebrate our graduation. But the students are reflecting a sentiment that they're not mad at the protesters for losing their graduation, which we don't have confirmation of. That's just speculation. But they're mad at the administration and for letting in the NYPD and escalating the situation in their eyes. And Barnard student government came out today and said that they are disappointed in the university trying to use graduation as leverage to get protesters to disband, and they fully back the protesters.
Do you think it's going to work?
What's going to work? Barnard students pressuring the administration?
Yeah.
I really don't know. I think anything is possible at this point. The university has conceded to some of CUAD's proposals. They've committed to being financially transparent. Students voted in both schools at Barnard and Columbia in a referendum vote to divest. But the university has said they're not divesting from Israel. So it remains to be known what kind of impact the student opinion is going to have long term.
Got it. I really appreciate all of your perspective here. It's an important perspective. We want to make sure that the student voice is heard in all of this chaos. It's something that is interrupted your day-to-day life. And Isa, I really can't appreciate or thank you enough for your words tonight.
Thank you so much, Gadi.
And I believe we still have Stephen Romo, who is on the outskirts of campus as well, monitoring this situation. Let's go to Stephen. If you can hear me, Stephen, what's the latest from your vantage point?
Gadi, yeah, I actually was moved off of campus, as you mentioned, and seeing exactly as it's been described, the protesters just having outrage for what they are primarily hearing about. There's not a lot they're able to see directly from the vantage point on the Broadway side of campus, but what they're actually looking at their phones and seeing is going on at Hamilton Hall is upsetting them, and there's a lot of outrage focused on that, and a lot of questions being shouted to the New York City police officers who were there to hold them back. And in the midst of all that, there was a bout of rain that started, which I think upset people further, but did not seem to disperse them to any degree. But there, from just a chance that were being shouted at officers, then they turned to questions being asked of the officers about exactly what's happening, trying to get information directly from NYPD members themselves. But again, the police largely did not seem to be answering those types of questions.
Do we know what's happening inside of the campus right now?
Yeah, in addition to what's going on at the actual administration building, we know that students are sheltering in place. And when I was back on campus, many of them were opening their windows, some just to watch what was going on, but others to yell at the officers, that are in riot gear, calling them names and stuff, just expressing their outrage that was happening on their campus. There were some that were just watching and not shouting those types of things, but they did tell us that they were told to stay in those buildings, and they were asked not to leave there, to shelter in place there, in effect. And they seem to be doing that for the most part, but they were not all happy about it, that's for certain.
And it looks like, Stephen, we're starting to get the first shots from on campus, showing some of the tents that are on campus being ripped down by the NYPD. And you can see that this is the encampment that we've been showing. NYPD has been nowhere near that encampment, and now you see it almost entirely surrounded. You've got officers on what looks like all sides. Some of them were dismantling those tents. We haven't seen any of the skirmishes that were happening in that encampment. So we don't know what happened prior to this video, but when this video was taken just a few moments ago, we can see that there aren't many people in that encampment area, in the tents proper. You've got NYPD taking down some of those tents, and then you've got lines of officers, skirmish lines on both sides of this vantage point, as well as what appears to be the far side surrounding that encampment. So it does look like we've got hundreds and hundreds of the NYPD now on Columbia's campus. We've also seen, had to be something like, and this is a live picture coming in. I want to show you what's going on here. This is off campus. You've got a skirmish line protecting the backside of where the officers have made entry into campus, and then you've got these people that have come out to either see what's happening, or these protesters that have come from outside of the campus to gather there at the line of officers that is now trying to keep people from going toward Columbia University. Those pictures that we were just seeing a little while ago from the encampment, again, we're just getting details. The NYPD is putting out a few statements trying to quell misinformation. We had been hearing reports earlier that tear gas may have been used inside of Hamilton Hall. NYPD has come back and said, no, we did not fire tear gas. We fired a distraction device, possibly like a bang or a flash bang device to try to startle maybe somebody that was inside. But we saw probably about 40, 50, maybe even 60 officers that made their way up a fortified, heavily armored vehicle that had a ladder. They made entry into Hamilton Hall, and they did not come out. So we don't know if they were able to engage with the protesters inside and make arrests and possibly take them out a different location, but we have not seen them come out from the side that we were on. We have not seen any of the barricades coming down from Hamilton Hall, but again, it is very difficult to get live pictures from on campus right now. What you're seeing are pictures and video that have been uploaded to social media sites or have been sent to us from Hamilton Hall and from Columbia University. But right now we're looking at another image looking down right outside of Columbia University at the very, very large contingent of NYPD officers out there. I believe we still have Jim Kavanaugh with us. Jim, if I can bring you in here, just seeing the situation as it's unfolded. We've seen many arrests. We haven't seen a lot of violent crashes, but now we are seeing the first images from inside of the campus of some of those tents being taken down. What does that tell you we've seen on campus so far?
Well, guys, the NYPD Civil Disturbance Unit here, the Strategic Response Group, and the Emergency Service Unit have a very calculated response and strategic plan they're executing. First, you saw them put the Bear vehicle, that's the larger of the armored vehicles that SWAT teams use nationwide, and That's part of NYPD's emergency service unit, which is basically their SWAT unit. And they use that bare vehicle with the hydraulic ramp to send in a phalanx of officers after they forced open a window on the second floor. And what they're trying to do is bypass the barricades of the students. So they have enough intelligence to know where barricades are inside the building. They might have planted some listening devices, and they've watched some videos that are on the web, and you can see that, where they're barricading doors, and they have some intelligence. So they were trying to bypass that, get inside, put those officers in so they can have more egress to where the students are. And as you pointed out, they arrested about 24 or so while we were on the air earlier. So they're whittling down the crowd. And then they made a perimeter around their activity there, so no one can come in and interfere with them. There are some protesters outside the police line there, and now they're taking down the little tent encampment that was on the grassy area. So they have a strategic plan. They're executing it. It sounds like they might have tossed a flashbang upstairs inside at someone. A noise flash diversionary device, they're called. So they're not going to injure you, but it just startle you. It's a loud noise and a flash. The slang is a flashbang. And the NYPD, as you reported, said they haven't deployed any gases yet.
Now, Jim, there's going to be a large part of the country that's watching this and saying, oh, this seems to be, going by the book. We haven't seen any massive clashes so far. We haven't seen any obvious signs of violence. And then there's going to be a large part of the country that sees this and is absolutely horrified by the sheer amount of police and the police force that has now made their way onto the Columbia campus. When it comes to a dynamic situation with an encampment, with a building that has been taken over by protesters, is this the playbook? Is there anything else that can be done to de-escalate, or are we seeing what NYPD set out to do going according to plan?
Right. Well, I would say, like Yogi Berra said, it's not over till it's over. And I'm not sure it's over yet, because the hardcore of these anarchists, are still inside the building. So they haven't maybe reached the hardest core of the people inside yet. So it's still ongoing. But yes, an overwhelming show of force tends to damp down the resistance. If you send just a few officers, they can be mobbed and overwhelmed when a crowd feels like they can mob and overwhelm them. When a crowd feels like the force against them is an impenetrable force, but yet behaves strong and peacefully, but with, strength, and proper police procedure, then that tends to damp down things. That's why you see people get arrested peacefully. They're staring in the face of a few hundred officers. And, just some viewers may know and some may not, but I mean, the NYPD has 40,000 officers. The LAPD has 10,000 officers. And New York is 4 times the size of LAPD. Chicago has usually about 13,000 officers. So the NYPD dwarfs everybody in size of the number of officers they have. And they have the ability to come in with this kind of force because they do so many large events, so many big things in the city, and they can bring the troops to do it. And that helps to damp down things. The show of peaceful strength tends to damp down the violence. But we're not out of the woods yet.
No, we're not, and those numbers are on full display tonight. I do want to check in with Stephen Romo, because you've had a different vantage point of the show of force going into Columbia University. Stephen, what's been the reaction from students seeing the NYPD engage on campus after being kept away for over a week?
Well, there were a few students who seemed to welcome that, very much in the minority of what I saw. If anything, there were some others that seemed sort of to expect it or indifferent. But most vocal that I saw were people who were unhappy to see the police officers going onto campus. I've covered a lot of tense situations, a lot of unrest. I've never seen this show of force, this number of officers pour into one place at one time. It's like nothing that I've ever seen, and I'm certain that's true for many of these college students as well. It's surreal to see that on their college campus, a veritable army of the NYPD pouring in to complete this operation. It's just it's uncanny to see in this Ivy League campus, and they were experiencing that in real time. And many of them, as you'd imagine, are taking photos and videos, and they're going to remember where they were when this actually happened. But a variety of responses.
And Steve, I think it's really important to note here that Columbia University, there are many students that are on campus right now that are not protesting. They live on campus. Do we know whether they are being told to shelter in place? Are they free to leave if they want? Or are they being kind of held in their rooms here?
The students that I've talked to said that they've been asked to shelter in place. I've not seen anyone be forced to stay in their buildings, in their dorms. I have seen outside of campus now. I have seen other students who are out. They have either been out or have just not gone back onto campus yet. So that I've not seen, but they've been asked. At the very least, they've been asked to stay inside their room. And you mentioned the students who aren't directly involved. In addition to that, Gadi, we saw students today with boxes and suitcases who were leaving. They were leaving campus. They are done with classes, and they just don't want to deal with it anymore. We also talked to a parent who was there to pick up her freshman daughter and said that the occupation of the administration building was sort of the last straw for this tense situation, and that they were going to go. So there are people who are sort of caught in this that they don't want to be in this situation that they aren't seeking to be a part of, that are trying to get out of the way, either staying in their dorms right now and just watching this happen, or who chose to leave earlier in the day or as it's unfolded.
Yeah, quite the confusing no man's land there. Stephen Romo, thank you so very much. And I believe we have Tom Winter on the phone. Tom Winter has been breaking so much news on what we're seeing right now, and I believe Tom has some new and updated reporting when it comes to those rumors of tear gas being used that do not appear to have been true, and what actually went down inside of Hamilton Hall. Tom, are you with us?
Yes, Scotty. So we can address that at least from the NYPD's perspective. So the spokesperson says that they did not use tear gas. That's their assertion, that was not used, that they used flashbangs. So the difference there is that tear gas creates a physical reaction, leads somebody to obviously quite literally cry. It's disorienting. It is miserable and not comfortable. I've smelled it. The flashbang is used as a kind of a quick way to distract somebody. It can obviously a huge burst of light, a very loud noise, and can be momentarily disorienting. That allows police to at least have a little bit of an upper hand when they think they might be faced with a potential violent response from somebody. But having said all of that, the good news, at least according to the NYPD, is that there's been no injuries tonight. No injuries reported from students, no injuries reported from police. And so that's something that obviously we'll continue to watch and monitor, but at least from the police department's perspective, no injuries. And more broadly, just speaking with city officials and law enforcement officials who've been watching this, there's a feeling tonight so far is that this has been, from a law enforcement operations standpoint, a success, because they feel like we were invited onto the campus by the school. They asked us to take into custody a number of individuals for trespassing. So obviously that's the tent camp, and you've been showing a lot of video of that in the last several minutes. And so those individuals will be taken by NYPD bus. They'll be processed and given a summons, which for the rest of the country is just really a ticket, for lack of a better phrase or analogy. So they'll be given a ticket for trespassing. They'll be told not to go back to that area. Colombia obviously might consider disciplinary action. They've suggested that. But that ends the law enforcement process really for them. They're not, there's no mugshot. They're not fingerprinted. None of that occurs. For the individuals in Hamilton Hall, and this is a little bit different. So it's our understanding that the NYPD is currently either in the process of or just wrapping up clearing the top floor of Hamilton Hall. For the rest of it, they've cleared. According to a senior law enforcement official, to my colleague Jonathan Dienst and myself, that they found a number of barricades. They've made a number of arrests on that top floor. They encountered barricades that include overturned soda machines, couches, chairs, basically ways to slow down the police response in that building. That's according to a senior New York City law enforcement official briefed on this. And there's been a number of arrests there. The arrests there, according to the NYPD, before this operation began, could include not only trespassing, charges of vandalism, charges of burglary, and other associated charges. Again, no reported injuries to police, so no indication that more serious charges that could lead to a desk appearance ticket or a possible prosecution. Those would be assault-type charges. No indication that those have been filed. But we really won't know, Gadi, until about midnight, 1 a.m. Eastern time, when it just comes down to a simple Excel spreadsheet that's generated of who is taken into custody, what they're charged with, and that type of information then finds its way over to the press part of the NYPD, and is usually something that's provided to us in this type of event, or at least the numbers of it. So the good news, I think, for anybody watching this is that at least at this point, there's no indication from officials to us that any students have been injured. There's no indication that any police or any other individuals have been injured. So that's obviously at least some good news out of this situation, which had really evolved and devolved, as you and I spoke earlier this evening, over the last 8 to 12 hours.
Yeah. Tom Winter, we appreciate your reporting. Just to quickly recap there, that breaking news that Tom is reporting is that it looks like most of Hamilton Hall has been cleared of protesters. Senior law enforcement source telling him that police are on the top floor of Hamilton Hall, clearing barricades and making some more arrests on the top floor there. But the lower floors have been cleared, and those barricades are also being cleared out. We wanted to bring in another student perspective here. We've got Chris Mandel. He's a University News staff writer at University News. He's joining us now live, I believe, on campus, and possibly either sheltered in place. I don't know how you want to describe it, but can you leave where you are right now?
So we're not allowed to leave right now. I'm on a dorm room on 114th Street called Ruggles Hall. We were chased here by the NYPD, and they're barricading the door right now. They said we're not allowed to leave. If we're seen outside, we risk arrest. So they're not letting us do anything besides sit here. I was in this little lobby for about 15 minutes. Or for about 2 hours with 15 other students. And it turned out some residents of the dorm started coming out to let us inside so people would use the bathroom, get water, and things like that.
Right, so this is a whole different type of barricade. I mean, I saw behind you, is that an officer peeking in?
So these are 2 officers right here, yes.
And those officers are there to make sure no one leaves that building right now. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I was reporting on 114th Street, and officers started yelling at everyone to get in a dorm or get arrested. So we ran down the street and we went into the first dorm we were able to get into, and we kind of took shelter here. And shortly after getting inside, the police joined us over here, and that's where we've been ever since. So we've been here for about 2 hours at this point.
I hate to make you guess here, but how many other students do you think are in similar situations across campus, as you have hundreds of officers all throughout Columbia now?
So I would say it's at least hundreds of students. So the Columbia Daily Spectator team and other student journalists are in Pulitzer Hall and in various locations right now. So it's got to be hundreds. Every dorm room on 114th Street, the same thing happens. And there were tons of people on the street who popped inside at about that time.
And as you understand it, if you just go outside, you're not necessarily engaged in the protest or you're going about your business, you will be detained?
That's what they've told us. We had someone who said that they have a heart condition in here with us, and they asked to leave to go and get their meds because they're not in this dorm, and the police said, no, call an ambulance.
When the officers made their way onto the campus, what did you see happen?
So they set up barricades on 114th Street, and they were walking towards the entrance next to Butler Library near Carmen Hall. And it was at that point where NYPD and SRG units started pushing everyone into dorms. So that's all I really saw from my perspective. And then in the entrance that I'm in front of right now, we were seeing students get let out in zip ties. And we saw one student who was limp. We heard reports that there was one unconscious student, so we think we saw an unconscious student being carried out.
And how far away are you from the encampment?
I'm across the street from the encampment. So the entrance that I'm right next to, the encampment would be right behind that. We can't really have a good view right now because you can't see that direction, but I could probably see it if I stepped outside.
Which you can't do because there's officers right there on the door still, right?
Yeah, if I've peeked out the door, I've asked them to leave, and they push the door closed and tell us we're going to get arrested. They've been getting a little bit more respectful as the night has gone on, and they've started telling us this is for our safety and things like that, treating us like people again. But for a while, they were being very aggressive.
Does it look like most of the action has taken place already? Does it look like they've cleared out the encampment that we're seeing video of there, as well as Hamilton Hall?
That's what I've heard. I've heard a lot of the action is complete, and I've heard that there were a ton of arrests. We saw 2 full prison buses pass by us, and from other reporters that I've talked to on the ground right now, they've also said that it looks like the action has subsided, but I have no way of knowing because I'm stuck in here, and a lot of people, their phones are dying, so we're losing connection to people and stuff, so yeah.
I mean, this is all happening during your semester. This is happening during school, right? So as a student, with the end of the semester right around the corner, finals, graduation, what is this experience like?
It's been a really difficult time. So our last day of class was actually, I believe it was yesterday, if yesterday was Monday. And that's our last day of class, and we're supposed to have 3 days to study for finals, and then finals begin on Friday. So to have to study for finals right now with all this going on, I have friends stuck in here with me who they can't study because their laptop is at home. I had another friend whose laptop was stuck in another dorm, and he wasn't able to get his stuff because the NYPD wouldn't let him go past the barricades to grab it. So we're not able to study. We're not able to do anything like that. It's making it really difficult for us. So I think we have a student right now. NYPD.
Oh, I'm sorry. If we can pull up their picture there.
For medication.
Yeah, we'd love to listen in.
No, because
It would be an hour, it would be an hour, I'm not sure.
okay, but will it end before like morning? Because
Probably, but I don't want to tell you there's 100% of them,
yeah, because people they don't have their meds, so it's kind of like it's an issue because they don't live here.
So this is basically a resident or another student from the dorm. She's telling the police officers that there's people who need their medication, don't have their meds, and don't live here and are trapped in here, and they're not allowed to go and get their meds. And the police are saying they don't know if it's going to be an hour. They don't know if it's going to be by tomorrow morning. They don't know when we're getting out of here.
How many people are in the building that you're in right now?
So who took refuge with me, I would say it's probably over 15 people. About 15 were in the lobby. And then there's a bunch of residents here. So I'd say the residents, there's probably 200 residents in addition to the 15 who scrambled in here to avoid getting arrested.
Now, I know that you're part of the University News, you're a staff writer with University News there. Have you been following these reports, this pushback from NYPD about outside agitators and anarchists that have co-opted the message on campus? Have you followed any of that? And if you have, I wonder what the reaction is from students on campus to that type of messaging that we're hearing from the NYPD.
So I've seen reports of that. I've talked to some of my sources. I haven't been able to confirm any of that, so I'm not sure. And being in here, I like to talk to my sources face to face to get a better indication of things. I can't meet up with anyone, so I can't find that out. But I've heard that there's agitators from probably the same NYPD press briefing, but we haven't been able to independently confirm that.
Got it. I know you're the part of the class of 2024, is that correct?
Yeah, 2024.
And so this is your graduation year, right? I mean, were you one of those that had to skip graduation because of COVID as well?
No, I'm a non-traditional student, so I'm 28. I was in the military before this, so I'm a late bloomer in that aspect. I was here during the COVID lockdown, but I wasn't affected like that, thankfully.
Got it. And we're seeing some new video coming in from the side of your screen there. I'm not sure if you can see it, but you can see officers making entry. It looks like it's it's Hamilton Hall. They're breaking in doors and they're clearing the rooms from room to room. Have you heard of any potential barricades anywhere else around campus? There's a lot of rumors that are circulating online. Hamilton Hall was the only one that we could get confirmed that people were inside and actively barricading, preventing officers from coming in. But have you heard of any other halls or any other residences where it's the opposite of your situation? People are inside, not allowing officers in?
I haven't heard anything like that. Since yesterday, when they took over Hamilton Hall, there were rumors that another hall was in danger, but I haven't heard that actually happened. And as far as I know, it was only Hamilton Hall.
Man, well, we can't appreciate that first-person reporting inside, that view of a student asking to be let out or asking for medication to be brought in, and the NYPD officers behind you with a very clear lack of answers. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Sure. We're joined again by NBC's National Law Enforcement and Intelligence Correspondent Tom Winter, who is joining us from the phone again here. Tom, I'm not sure if you were able to hear that, but it sounds like there are hundreds of students on campus, and the front of their buildings may be blocked by NYPD officers who are not allowing anyone to leave as this action takes place on campus. Does any of that surprise you?
No, not in the least bit. I mean, right now, the NYPD goes on campus. They don't know who's a Columbia student, who's been on that, who's been in a tent, who hasn't been in a tent. So there's really no way for them to know who's who and who's doing what. And I would expect here within the next few hours, they're going to get a lot more clarity as to what's going on. It's also a bit of a function for Columbia's school safety in the school to be able to communicate to people, to communicate to people as far as what's going to happen next and how this is going to go. And I think the police department will feel better once they know they've cleared Hamilton Hall, which is pretty much close to being done. And then when that encampment has been fully dismantled, which apparently is happening right now. Just a brief update so far of our initial indication from law enforcement is that we are up to 100 arrests. So right now it's 100 arrests, and in the tent, those have now all been removed, and so the belongings of the students, that'll be up to Columbia University to kind of meter out. 40 arrests in Hamilton Hall, and the first hall is is what we're hearing. And again, the bulk of this reporting is from Jonathan Dean, so I've been on the phone with you, Gadi. So that's what we're hearing. You've seen some video from inside this hall from an account, Kaz Daughtry. He's the Deputy Commissioner of Operations for the NYPD, so he's really kind of the person who's overseeing all the commanders there on the ground, and you're seeing them inside of Hamilton Hall. So as far as what happens next, I mean, I can only imagine being a college student. You're in a dorm. You may not know everybody. You certainly don't know the place. You're away from your stuff. It'll be interesting to see kind of what happens here, and I appreciate that. I think now that the NYPD has cleared out that encampment, you're looking at how it looked earlier there on the left side of your screen.
I think that's probably a big step. They just didn't want people to reoccupy that after they've already been there. And I think once NYPD feels like they've established enough of a presence on campus, they'll probably go to the university and say, okay, how do you guys want to handle this from here? And we'll see where things go. So, look, a lot of moving parts left to go here, Gadi, but it looks like at this point, a lot of the heavy law enforcement work has been completed tonight. That's at least what we're being told so far.
And Tom, I am just struck at the sheer amount of officers. I heard Stephen talking about it earlier. He said he had never seen as many officers. And we were just showing a shot a couple of minutes ago of a street that does not appear to be part of the campus there. And on every stoop, on the front of every single building, there were 2 officers that appeared to be stationed there. Not sure if they're watching who comes in and who comes out of buildings, but this is all surrounding the neighborhoods on the outskirts of Columbia. So is that right? They'll have officers stationed in front of just normal residences and buildings all around Columbia to be able to stop the flow of people going into this area?
Yeah, so I think the plan here was to look at this and say, okay, if when we go on campus, all of a sudden there's a mass exodus of people going off campus, we don't want private residences to be impacted. We don't want students who live in a lot of those private buildings off campus. We don't want them to be somehow overrun. If we're looking for somebody, we'd like the ability to stop and question those people. So that's all part of the rollout in the way that they plan this. The second thing was to go into Hamilton Hall to be able to document, and we're seeing some of those videos, what they saw, what occurred, and to be able to put out information quickly on the arrest there. And then I think, it's part of the letter. Columbia is looking for help, not just tonight, but they want to make sure that, okay, so the NYPD comes in and this happens tonight. They don't want to be right back here again tomorrow night with another encampment and another problem and a graduation postponed. So I think they're looking at it in totality. They're looking at it in the long run, how this is going to be handled, and we'll see where we go from there.
And Tom, it looks like we're just getting word from NYPD that Hamilton Hall is now cleared. The video that we were showing was those officers going through and clearing Hamilton Hall. The tent city is cleared, but the tents and belongings are still there and will be handled by the university. How does that work?
Yeah, so that's really up to the school now to determine, okay, do you want to have, these students come back? Are they going to be students that are suspended or expelled? Remember, that's been part of the debate, as you well covered the last couple of days here. So the NYPD, I think, because they don't want to be in the property management business, is going to cede that back to the university and say, however you guys want to distribute these people's belongings is the way that this is going to go. But their main focus is they were asked to come in by Columbia University. They were asked to make these trespassing arrests. They were asked to give students a notice that this is what was going to happen. So I think from the police department's perspective, they've done their job, and now it's up to the school to figure out how people can get their stuff back.
And we're watching right now on your screen that the arrest was happening. It's happening live there. From the latest numbers that I'm seeing, about 100 arrests so far. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah, that's about right. The information now coming in a little bit more. I think, as I alluded to, as we get closer to midnight and 1 a.m., we'll get some more specifics. That seems right to me, and we're going to continue to track that through the night and hopefully get some more specifics on who was actually charged, what actually occurred. There may have been some minor skirmishes between police and protesters. We're going to see if anybody will actually be charged with that. And we'll wait to see how that kind of all works its way out. But that's something we are hearing from law enforcement officials. Nobody is describing to us, at least, that there's been any sort of significant violent episodes between police and protesters. But, Gadi, as you well know, and as I always like to remind people, we're just a few hours into it. And in this day and age, as video comes out, as things come out, we'll only know really several more hours from now, if not tomorrow, how this all shook out real time. And of course, it's very different now because we've had major protests. I'm thinking of Occupy Wall Street in the past, where there were no images of what actually happened. Well, as we clearly saw from the video, the flashing red light on those officers' vests, that's not for visibility. That's their body-worn cameras. And the NYPD has a full body-worn camera system. So we're going to see and be able to see video from what actually happened here when this went down, either through public information requests or through the NYPD releasing it on their YouTube channel at some point here. So we'll have some clarity as to what happened, I think, from a number of different perspectives, and that'll let us know, if this has been a nearly entirely peaceful operation or whether there were clashes and how all that went down. But again, that's in the hours and really probably days to come.
And Tom, we just heard from a student who described seeing someone that was led away by police, carried away, in fact, by police, and they appeared to be unconscious. Are there any injuries that we've seen reported, or is that part of this fog of everything that we're seeing unfold live?
Yeah, so this information is now, we're uncovering it moment to moment, minute to minute, Gadi, but this information now a little bit old. We'd initially been told there were no injuries or no serious injuries. I have no way of confirming what that student told you. I heard him say that, and I certainly not in any way telling you it didn't happen. It's just a matter of when we find out. And obviously, it's a big campus, it's a big police operation, and you're involving a number of different commands and commanders. So you've got emergency services, you've got SRG, the Strategic Response Group, which handles a lot of riots and protests, and you've got some more heavily armored components of ESU that were there and available. So you look at it in its totality. I think by the time everybody gets their numbers right and gets a debrief, I wouldn't be surprised if we hear about injuries, either to students or police or both. But as of right now, we haven't been told of anything significant, but obviously that can certainly change. So I wouldn't expect that to be the end-all, be-all of information tonight.
And Tom, I mean, this is such a massive operation. It seems as though an operation this complex with this many officers would take some planning. We know that letter that you put out there and the information from the university requesting NYPD's help officially happened, and then immediately after that, NYPD moved in. How much planning was NYPD doing before that letter came, do you think?
Right. So the New York City Police Department is not a perfect organization. They would be the first to tell you that. They do some things well. They do some things really well. Planning is one of those types of things. So they have a general plan for all sorts of citywide emergencies, including civil unrest at these types of schools. And so what they'll look at is and we've been in constant communication with Columbia's student safety and public safety department. So it's not as if they walked into this cold or have just been watching News Now all week long, although they definitely watch all the TV networks and all the streaming networks too. But when you look at this from a planning perspective, they say, okay, which officers are best equipped to handle Hamilton Hall? That's Emergency Services Unit. They'll get on top of that truck and climb through the ladder, and they know how to go room to room. I've been with them while they've done this to clear, in a training capacity, to be clear, to be able to handle Hamilton Hall. Okay, SRG is best equipped to handle protests. This is how many students we expect on the quad. If that's how many students we have, this is how many SRG officers we have. And then we go to patrol, who can be on those side streets that you, I think, astutely pointed out. They're even off campus, and they have a presence there. And then they have a plan as far as how to get the students that they've taken into custody on a bus, out of there. Let's process them quick. Let's get them out and keep things moving. So all of this is kind of a general plan and then they just tailor it to the school. I think given the way this is going, they knew for some time that eventually they were going to go there. And then obviously as today appeared to have escalated in Hamilton Hall, the police department felt they were in a position that they needed to move. I got a couple of questions leading up to this inside our newsroom, Gadi, about, well, is the National Guard going to be called in? And no offense to National Guard, but they're not close to the size in New York of the NYPD as far as the ability to have people on hand readily. The NYPD is its own Army division, over 30,000 sworn. So they have the complete ability to scale up and scale down personnel assignments and be able to handle something like this while still catching 911 calls and other incidents throughout the city. And there are some scattered protests throughout the city tied to pro-Palestinian supporters that are getting their attention as well. So that it's not as if it's its own thing. And they have a whole host of helicopters they can deploy to all these events. And if you're in a command car, so if you're a boss at the NYPD, you can pull up on your computer in your car a live stream from any one of those helicopters. So they have a total view of what their officers are doing fairly real time.
And Tom, when it comes to those who have been arrested or detained, what's the process? How soon are they going to be booked and released, I guess?
Yeah, so generally speaking, if you were one of the students who had a tent and you said, I'm not leaving, the NYPD shows up, they say, you are leaving, you're trespassing, you've been told so by the school and by us. They'll take you into custody, likely in those flexor cuffs, the plastic cuffs that you see. You'll be put in a transport bus or van and be taken to, that changes up a little bit because of the size of this operation, but typically taken to a precinct. You'd be issued a summons, which is like a ticket, and they might see if you had any outstanding warrants or other issues, and then at that point you're free to go, and you just handle the summons that way. For somebody that's charged with perhaps burglary, I'm thinking of the Hamilton Hall, some of the charges the NYPD said they might consider burglary, vandalism, any sort of assault if that occurred between a protester and police, that would be more serious. That would be a desk appearance ticket. You've got to come back, and you might actually be arrested and booked, and fingerprints, mugshot, all that type of thing would be done. That would obviously be a much longer process. And for things more serious than that, then that starts to involve the entirety of the judicial system and formal charges and arraignment before a judge, et cetera. So I think for most of these students, they're going to be going the route of a summons, and I would expect that by morning they'll be out and free to go, and they'll just need to pay and deal with the summons.
Now, Tom, you've got law enforcement sources all over the country. I wonder what they are thinking as they watch what's happening in New York tonight, given that we've got over 40 to 50 protests and encampments and similar demonstrations happening around the country. Obviously, the big turning point at Columbia seems to be this barricade situation, this takeover of Hamilton Hall there. But when it comes to the rest of the schools, the student protesters that are watching this, as well as the law enforcement agencies that are watching this, what do you think that we're going to see in the next few days at those demonstrations and at those rallies?
So following 9/11, the NYPD came up with a number of programs, including Operation Sentry, which is a law enforcement information sharing platform. And so you can bet the NYPD will say, hey, we arrested a number of individuals, perhaps tied to Hamilton Hall, and these individuals we've been tracking for a number of years, and they have prior law enforcement contacts in these few places. This is hypothetical. And they'll make sure those jurisdictions are aware. So there's that component to it. They might share best practices, some of the things that they saw. This is what worked. These were some of the challenges. This is what some of the students told us. And that information will be shared. And you can bet it's being shared among law enforcement agencies all across this country and has been for the last few days. I know that that's the case. Separately, the FBI will look at this and say, was there any sort of funding or issues here that could be a violation of federal law? We had an exclusive interview with Christopher Wray, our colleague Lester Holt did last week, and he said, look, we're not monitoring protests. That's something we definitely can't do. But we would keep an eye on it if there's any sort of violence or anything with the nexus to overseas. So they'll take a look at those arrested and see if there's anybody that kind of hits in a database or anybody that they might be concerned about. They'll share that. And then really it's up to each individual campus and university. I mean, I think we've seen that, as you and all the programs on News Now have been documenting, each campus has been a little bit different, and how they allow police on, do they have their own police force, how they handle with it, when is it enough, when do they believe that it's okay. We've got students who are exercising their First Amendment right. I think one of the big issues have been when some of these protests have taken on some deep anti-Semitic tones. And if the Jewish population at a particular school or university feels threatened, doesn't feel safe to go to class, that's something that gets law enforcement's attention. But I remind people one of the reasons why NYPD is here tonight, even though this has been going on for some time, Columbia University is a private school. And so if the NYPD just decided to show up at that school, say 2 or 3 nights ago without being invited on campus, and there's quite a history here of the NYPD not being invited on campus, then you'd be in a situation where it'd be the NYPD breaking the law, potential violations of the Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment. So it makes it a little bit more complicated when we're talking about private universities and how they choose to handle these types of issues of trespassing. It's a little bit more complicated than usual, say, if it was a highway or a bus stop.
And Tom, kind of reading between the lines in that letter from the university to NYPD, as well as the university statement afterwards, their acknowledgement that they understood that the NYPD may use LRAD, and we have not seen any reports that was deployed on Columbia's campus. But just reading between the lines, them putting that down on paper in that letter, how significant was that?
Yeah, I mean, the NYPD uses different technology. LRAD is a type of way of has different uses of really projecting sound over a crowd. Sometimes it can be an extremely obnoxious sound to disperse individuals. The NYPD, if anybody's seen any protest video over the last several years, and a number of departments do this, but you're asking me about NYPD, so I'm addressing this. Typically in the past, though I was not on campus tonight, and most news organizations couldn't remotely get close to getting in the gates, to the gates, let alone in them. When they typically approach these groups, they'll just play on a regular loudspeaker. This is the New York City Police Department. I'm paraphrasing. This has been cited as an unlawful protest or cited as a potential trespassing. You're now being told that you're trespassing or you're doing something unlawful. And if you continue to stay here, you're subject to arrest. And that's something that they typically play on a loudspeaker. And they usually have members of the NYPD legal team there so they can document that they let everybody know that they were in violation of the law and that, if they stay there, that they were subject to that arrest. So there's a number of different steps they can take to do that. What technology they use, how, many people heard it. As I kind of alluded to before, these are some of the finer points that I think will become clear in the hours and days to come.
Well, Tom, we'll give you a little bit of a break to do some actual reporting. I can't thank you enough for taking so much time to let us know what you're seeing and hearing as all this unfolds. We're going to turn now to Antonia Hilton. Antonia, thank you for putting us in touch with Chris Mandel. He was the University News staff writer that we spoke to, who had such an incredible first-person perspective, looking out the door of the place where he was he said he was being barricaded by officers on the outside, unable to leave that residence hall. And that seems to be the situation for many other students that are currently on campus there that are not participating in the protests. Antonia, have you been speaking to other students who are in similar situations as well?
Oh, yeah, Gadi, we are hearing from students all over campus, some of whom have been barricaded just like Chris was, some who have been kind of trapped. Once all these barricades were set up by the NYPD and certain streets were closed, they tell us they're having trouble getting back to their dorms so that they can go to bed and get some rest tonight. And so students are extremely unsettled by all of this. Many of them have also now witnessed about 100 of their classmates get arrested, carted on buses, and brought downtown, something that back on April 18th they described as extremely traumatizing for them. Even students who weren't necessarily connected to the protest movement, who maybe hadn't really chosen publicly a side, they felt like it was really challenging. It was emotional for them to see this happen to such a large portion of the Columbia community here. The sentiment that I'm hearing from students and faculty is that, when they wake up tomorrow morning, just because this operation is done, 100 or so people have been arrested, 40 people arrested and cleared out of Hamilton Hall behind me here, that doesn't really mean that this story and all the tension surrounding it is over. They expect now, since the university has announced through a statement earlier this evening, that there's going to be an NYPD presence all the way until May 17th. Graduation is May 15th. The school has made it very clear that a large reason why they moved to do all of this is to protect graduation and all the celebrations that they hoped to hold here. Well, the idea of being in a celebratory mood, of having all kinds of parties and friends and family here and taking all those photos, while it matters to many people, after what they've experienced these last several weeks, there's a question for a lot of students about, how they really are going to be able to enjoy those moments, knowing that classmates are facing suspension or expulsion in some cases, knowing that so many students have felt unsafe from the presence of the NYPD here. I really haven't been able to find students who are super enthusiastic about their presence, not on April 18th and not tonight. There were some Jewish students who felt like the NYPD could have been called in earlier, that the university could have done more before it escalated to the massive scale that we saw tonight. And then other students feel like the university also had an obligation to just have a better dialogue with students, to come up with other options, to offer some kind of olive branch so that a different kind of resolution could be reached. So that's all to say that I think people are going to wake up tomorrow still really shaken and in many cases quite angry about how all of this has unfolded, Gadi.
And Antonia, just watching these images and then tomorrow seeing the aftermath politically as well as there in the community, do you think that there is a chance that some of the demands from the demonstrators could be met?
Oh, at this point, I think absolutely not. What I heard from Jelani Cobb, who's the dean of the journalism school, is that just a couple hours before we saw the NYPD move in, before that crane came down and we saw police officers move in through the window, that there had been an attempt to get the negotiations back on track. And that negotiating team, it involves students, faculty, and staff members and administration. The idea has been that they would all meet, they'd kind of have delegates who came up with different proposals and ideas. Well, Jelani had hope that something productive would come from that today that would avoid this entrance. But he sent me a text saying that those conversations were, quote, dead. And, we all saw what happened next. And so I don't think they're coming back to the table anytime soon. I think that there is now a feeling that this is, in a way, kind of the final act or final position from the university. They made very clear in a statement that they don't plan to divest from Israel. I don't see how they go back on that after what's happened tonight. And so I think student protesters are going to have to go back to the table sort of on their own and figure out, well, what are they doing next? How do they exercise their free speech rights? But also, clearly, they're going to have a presence of the NYPD here that's going to limit the way in which they can express all of that. They're clearly not going to be able to reconstruct encampments or take over further buildings. So where does their movement go from here? And then for other students, there's a question of, well, do I even want to be here right now? I spoke to a mom earlier who had come to pick up her child, a freshman, and just get her out of here because this was all just too much for them to bear. And they're not alone in that. There are Jewish students who left 2 weeks ago. And so the entire community is actually not going to be here. They're not going to have the fullness on campus they're used to. And not everyone is ready to just put this in the past and then, you know, have your usual senior year parties and a fun commencement. I don't think that's where this is all going.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Do you think that this will further galvanize students, even more students possibly, or do you think that this will serve as a deterrent, at least there at Columbia?
You know, that was the same question that people asked me after what initially happened on April 18th. Okay, the police have come in. These students, they're facing court summonses. 100 plus of them were taken on buses. So this must, you know, put the fear of God in their classmates and mean that there won't be any more protests. Well, what happened next? There was an encampment, and here we are, you know, almost 2 weeks later. And so I don't think that what we're going to see happen next are students, you know, pack up all their flags and the posters that they've made and all the T-shirts and different symbols that they've created to be in community and in this movement with each other. I think they're going to have to change what protest, what free speech, the exercise of free speech looks like for them. But I highly doubt that this is going to be a deterrent. What we actually saw were the numbers grow. After what happened on April 18th, more students came. And in the moments when the university has threatened to bring the NYPD in, including tonight, what you see happen are a core group of protesters who are in the thick of it, in the action, or even in the building, right? But then you see hundreds more flood the streets in every corner and shout at the police officers, shout about the school administration, showing that they support their classmates. So, you know, I don't see that those people are going to necessarily stop now. I think they'll just have to come up with a new plan, Gadi.
Antonia Hilton with some incredible reporting tonight. Antonia, we appreciate your work so very much there at Columbia University. And I want to turn now back to the student perspective in all of this. Joining us now is Isa Farfan. She's a student journalist and a senior at Columbia's Barnard College. We checked in with her just a little while ago. She had a different vantage point on the other side of campus there. So, Isa, I just wanted to check in. Have you seen the situation where you are start to calm down, or are arrests still being made?
Yeah, so I was able to get out. It had been a while that I was kind of stuck between two barricades, so I'm actually back home. But where I was, things were starting to calm down. We didn't see as many people, you know, walking to the correction buses, and they were actually driving off, and students were, you know, shouting in support of the students in the correction buses.
Now, I'm not sure if you were able to hear Antonia's reporting just a little bit ago, but there's this sense, the sentiment that this is not going to make things, at least de-escalate tensions on college campuses after what we've seen tonight. She said that after April 18th, the numbers grew. Do you think that in the coming days we'll see more protests, we'll see more students coming out to demonstrate?
Yeah, I mean, I just got in the elevator at my building at Barnard, and everyone just got, you know, they got in inside and talked about the police brutality that they saw today, was the actual words that, you know, students were telling me. And, you know, I think on April 17th, when the first raid occurred on that original encampment, I think that radicalized students. That is what one student that I, you know, reported with, she told me that that was the moment she decided to hop over the fence. I watched hundreds of students, and this was an unplanned encampment. They watched their peers get arrested, students who were not involved in any of the previous protest activity that's been happening since October 7th. I watched them hop over the fence and set up that second encampment that was not planned. So I would not be surprised if there is a further escalation, especially talking to students about what they saw today, and images circulating on social media of students, you know, claiming that a medic was barricaded in a building, or that there were certain brutality incidents.
From your perspective, seeing that many officers on your campus, how did it make you feel? Did it make you feel safe? Did it make you feel threatened? What went through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, at some point I was concerned about just getting home, and I kept bouncing between 2 barricaded streets that I needed to get down to get to my apartment that's on campus. And I didn't feel safe. I felt a bit trapped, and I showed them my press badge and my student ID, and I thought that one of the two or the combination would get me through. But from a journalist perspective too, I've never been in that kind of situation before, and I don't think a lot of other student journalists have.
And from what you understand on campus, does it seem like the situation is now over?
Oh, I do not think it's over. I mean, this raid tonight is, the NYPD saying they're cleared, but this is not over. This is not over. I feel tensions boiling. We will see what happens, but it is not over.
Yeah, it seems like there's a sense of calm, especially outside of the perimeter, but we're also seeing crowds that are outside of those barricades on the far side of the campus. So do you think that we could see some more clashes tonight? Or the other situation that seems to be happening out there is rain. It looks like it's raining out there, right?
Yeah. In terms of clashes, I think the worst of it is gone. But I will say this movement runs a lot deeper than what happened tonight. I think this is the tip of the iceberg in my reporting. I have been talking to international students. I also spoke to one undocumented student who reported, not being actually involved in these protests where they're putting themselves at risk of arrest, but they have roles in the protests, whether it be providing tents, moving tents, bringing in masks, bringing in food, bringing in blankets. So the scope of this movement is so much larger than the students who got arrested. And these students are still on campus, still expected to take finals. And so, how we see this, manifest in the next couple of days, it might be different than students barricading themselves in a university building, but there are students on campus who are still involved in the movement.
And this is a movement that started here in the United States, at least at Columbia in the biggest way that we saw, and has spread, as you said, nationally. Over 40 universities and institutions seeing similar protests, as well as internationally. We've seen other universities across the world that are holding similar demonstrations. After tonight, do you think this will be a rallying cry?
I mean, absolutely. I think, and speaking from, the generation that graduated from high school from a car during the pandemic and, watched George Floyd protests all over the country while being quarantined, I think that social media and the sharing and, everyone had their phone out tonight. Everyone was filming. There are so many videos. There's access to what happened from far and beyond. So I would not be surprised if the incidents captured tonight by, students and journalists alike are what sparks an outcry.
Yeah, those images will echo well past tomorrow. Issa, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you get some sleep on this very, very chaotic night.
Thank you so much, Gadi.
Sure. We're going to leave you with these live images that we're watching here in New York City. It seems as though the situation has possibly de-escalated. The tensions have come down a little bit, but we know that there are officers still at Columbia campus. And that does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. Stay with NBC News and NBC News Now for continuing coverage.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.